the refrigerator, there is. I made you a thing of like grasshopper shots.
So as of August 2020, Durbin Creek PTO has received $284.52 from Amazon Smile.
Nice.
A lot of it's me.
And me.
No.
I've got 7 orders supporting the charity.
You're not the only one. I've ordered a large number of books recently. So he's taking shots?
I made him.
I hate this fucking thing so goddamn much.
Tell us how you really feel.
We're not filming her.
His microphone might be on. I don't know.
Are we live? I mean, we're live? All right, whatever. Well, you can tell, Evan, the PTO is that we're on Amazon Smile, and so a large percentage of the 30 books I've bought since I set my Amazon account to be on Smile has gone to the PTO. So, Joe Abercrombie put out a new book this week. Ken Follett had a new book this week. Yeah, he's a British dude. It's good fantasy. We're live. We're doing it. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming along, and welcome to the next episode of Professor Matt is Drunk. My lovely and talented executive producer has made me some shots. So I'm going to do some shots tonight out of Tiki Michelangelo, which, as previously stated, Tiki Michelangelo is not as strong as Tiki Leonardo, Tiki Donatello. Whatever you say, I'll never agree to it.
Okay, what's wrong with Michelangelo?
He's not the smart one of the leader.
He likes pizza.
He likes the pizza, and he's amazingly fun and awesome.
They all like
He's
pizza.
The best one. There is no debate. You are incorrect.
Okay, so
Okay, so welcome to
Agree.
talking about the Supreme Court, aka Debate over
I'm getting there. So tonight's topic, we're gonna do the Supreme Court. I have a little bit of notes with me because you want to quote stuff like exactly. So I have some quotes to read if we get to it, but they're not super long, right? And what we wanted to do is instead of talking about a single specific event for a long time, you of course, if you're on the internet in the past 12 hours, you've known that Associate Justice of the Court Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away last night at the age of 87 due to complications from cancer. She had colon cancer that metastasized and it ended up in the pancreas and in her lungs as well. But so she had probably been being treated for that pretty seriously in the past several months. And so, in honor of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we thought we would talk about some Supreme Court cases, right? Hers and others. So, a couple of things to get out of the way at the beginning. As always, I want to thank our Patreon subscribers, Chris Lee and Karen Lee Duffel, who have subscribed to us on Patreon. If you subscribe on Patreon, you get cool stuff, behind the scenes stuff, and also, like if there's something you want on Patreon, you can always ask us, and we might provide it, right? Top tier subscribers. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not going to give nudes, but
You're not giving nudes.
if they subscribe enough, I don't know. And so also I'd like to thank Yiffy Winkler, who frequently supports us on PayPal, and Ori, who did, yeah. And so thanks to you guys. Also, if you're a new watcher, new subscriber, new viewer, appreciate it. Thanks for coming. Hope you stick around. As always, when you hop in the comments, give us a shout out so that we know that you're there and we can say hi. If you have a question, ask in the comments. If there's a specific Supreme Court case that you want to talk about, that's probably going to be really possible in this lecture because I'm sure I don't have enough like cases that I picked out off the top of my head to talk about. So we probably have some extras that we can, some extra time. So if there's a case that you had in your head that you wanted to hear about, make sure. And then there's a list of cases. You take it. And if we stall out or something, you can just read a case off that, and I can talk about it. And so again, if there's a case you want to hear about, ask. I probably know at least a little bit about it. I can probably at least talk a little bit about it, right? So I figured we start at the beginning with what I think is the most important Supreme Court case.
First, let's talk about what the Supreme Court is.
Oh, okay.
Let's start at the very beginning.
All right, so the Supreme Court is one of the three branches of government that is set out in the U.S. Constitution. It's laid out in Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution. It's surprisingly sketchy, and so the Judiciary Act of, I think, 1801 is generally considered to be almost an adjunct to the text of Article 3 in expanding, defining, and clarifying the role of the Supreme Court, which has often been called the weakest branch of the U.S. federal government because it possesses limited enforcement ability and is dependent on the other branches for things like its budget and staffing and so on. Right. Currently, there are 9 Supreme Court justices, 8 as of last night, but there are seats for 9. That has not always been the case. The Reconstruction Amendments and Reconstruction Acts passed by the Congress after the Civil War expanded the number of justices considerably, in part to allow the Republicans to appoint justices that would uphold their political decisions in the aftermath of the Civil War. Right. And of course, these days, you tend to hear a lot about the court during elections because that has emerged as one of the central rallying cries, particularly on the right. I mean, if you want to let him out, he wants to go out. It's fine. As sort of a thing where, like, if you don't vote, conservative, you don't Republican, then the liberals are going to appoint a bunch of justices and like do all this bad stuff, right? And in a significant amount of the activism around that has centered around. It really looks like it's going to rain terribly, but it's not right now. But it's centered around Roe v. Wade, right? And the idea is the sort of brass ring, the ideological goal for many conservatives is the repeal of Roe v. Wade by getting five pro-life justices on the Supreme Court, right? And so that consequence of that, you hear a lot about that around election time. And rest assured, you're going to hear a lot about it in the next 48 days because it's 48 days till the 2020 election in November. And as you can imagine, the vacancy created by the untimely passing of Justice Ginsburg is going to create a huge incentive for Republican voters to support Donald Trump. And again, the argument might be that these are voters that might not have otherwise supported him, but might be willing to do it to sort of proverbially hold their nose in order to get another Supreme Court pick, or to avoid giving one to presumptive or to Democratic nominee Joseph Biden. right? And so, I mean, you're going to hear a lot about that, I think, in the news in the next month and a half. Yeah, he did his business apparently.
Also not corrected, so it's 45 days.
Is it 40? Is 49 days?
When was that?
A couple days ago. Yeah. All right. Well, sure. I mean, it's 40 days. Drinks. You can tell Hawk. I mean, I'll tell him. Don't worry, bro. We're gonna get to your court packing. We got it. I got it. It's on the. It is. Yeah. This is when I was out drinking with my executive producer. I wrote this. The only thing we had is a crayon, so I wrote these notes in crayon. But I wrote some note cards. So, all right. So let's talk about. We have any questions?
Evan just says, fuck with McConnell, he's a hypocritical piece of shit. I'm saying that only because I agree with
I mean, Mitch McConnell created a wonderful distinction that had never existed before in 2016, when in February, when Associate Justice Scalia passed away. President Obama nominated Circuit Court Judge, Appeal Court Judge Merrick Garland, and that was it, right? I mean, it was done. Well, except Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, created an idea that because the Republicans controlled the Senate and the Democrats had the president, the Republicans could sit on the nomination and wait, right? And of course, McConnell's strategy was high risk, high reward. It could be that if Hillary Clinton had won the election, she would be pressured to probably nominate someone more liberal. And then, of course, McConnell would have been in a tough call. But he said, I think the American people should get a voice in the selection of the justice by this election that's going to be in a few months. So, I mean, that would have been a really big oops. They would have been like, nominate someone more liberal. And McConnell said the American people could pick, and they did, right? On the other hand, McConnell could sit on the nominee and drive up turnout in the November election by sort of telling because look, the seat is at risk, right? The Supreme Court seat is essentially a prize to be given to the winner, but also it would allow him to not seat Merrick Garland, who was fairly moderate in all respects, but pick someone much more ideologically conservative, right? And it paid off. I mean, McConnell rolled the dice, and Donald Trump won. And instead of seating Merrick Garland, the Senate confirmed Neil Gorsuch. Right, who was, pretty conservative, although not as conservative probably as many Trump voters might have wanted, right? A relatively studied conservative in some respects, right? And so, and having said that, the question arises now, will McConnell do the same thing? It's a similar situation, a different situation arises in which the Republicans control both the Senate and the presidency. So instead of waiting, McConnell argues that we should just go ahead and confirm a justice, right? And in fact, he tweeted out a statement that, in effect, hours after learning about Ginsburg's death last night. What's that? Yeah, it was like within some number of minutes. Right, and of course, McConnell argues that it's different now because Republicans have the Senate as opposed to 2016, where there was a Republican Senate and a Democratic president. Right, and of course, I would argue that's a distinction without a difference in that McConnell simply invented that. That there's been no precedent in American history for the Senate saying, well, we're not going to confirm this justice because we don't agree with the party of the guy who did it in an election year. I mean, that's not really how it works. Even the most contentious Supreme Court nominee, Robert Bork, was borked, to use the verb. We'll get there. But then, of course, it was Kennedy was appointed in his stead, another nominee nominated by the same president in an election year, because Bork was nominated in '87 and Kennedy was nominated in '88. Bork withdrew, and Kennedy was not Kennedy. Kennedy was nominated in his stead in an election year, and the Senate considered the nominee. And so, McConnell is, I think, with that argument about the Senate composition and so on, he's trying to sort of reach for a plausible. He can't just say, look, the Senate's going to do its job or not do its job of nominating a justice and confirming him. Instead, we're just going to sit on the nomination because it's politically advantageous. He's not going to do that. He can't say that. So instead, he created this sort of ad hoc, after the fact justification of. In 2016, the Senate was Republican, the president Democrat. So right. And again, I think that's something that he just sort of dreamed up. It's a particularly facile staffer in McConnell's Senate office probably cooked up that one. Right. And of course, we got lots of quotes. Right. Lindsey Graham said, he said, come on in. All right. Lindsey Graham said, you can use my own words against me. And he said, I'll be the Senate Judiciary Chairman, and in 2016, after the primaries, but before the general election, if there's a vacancy, I don't think we should have hearings. I don't think we should do it. And of course, now he's saying like, well, it's totally different because the Senate was was a Democratic president with a Republican Senate, but now it's totally not the same. It's and it's like, right. I think that's an arbitrary distinction cooked up by McConnell's staff in order to justify the sort of lack of hearings that Merrick Garland got in 2016 versus the presumed not Trump nominee will get this year, right? And of course, the top candidate that we're hearing a lot about is Amy Coney Barrett, who is a former professor at Notre Dame and is on the appeals court now. And she's relatively conservative, and of course, also a woman, right? It would seem fitting to replace the late Justice Ginsburg with another woman. So, yeah. So, do you have any questions or anything?
No, because everybody agreeing that McConnell.
He's not super popular these days. The Thurman rule? Fuck is that? Thurmond? Strom Thurmond? What the fuck? I don't know. Strom Thurmond bullshit. This is the Thurman rule. You have to be as racist as possible at all times. I'm going to spell it right. Thurmond. I mean, if I look it up, I'll probably end up Thurman. Yeah, what is the Thurman rule? Okay. Well, that's some bullshit. And so, okay, the Thurman rule is related to a former Judiciary Senate Committee Chairman Strom Thurmond, who I hate more than almost any other person, except maybe not Mitch McConnell, John C. Calhoun. That's the one I hate the most. It's Calhoun. It's Calhoun. He's right up there in my gallery of rogues. But the Thurman rule said that at some point prior to the November presidential election, there is a point at which the Senate would not hear the name of a nominee, presumably for like bureaucratic and like organizational, like, if the election is Tuesday and the previous week a Supreme Court justice dies, there's just not time, right? And I think part of what Thurman was going for is that there is at some point you have to draw a line and say, look, if there's a Supreme Court vacancy less than so many days before the election, we're just not going to be able to fill it because we can't really have hearings. The senators who are up for re-election might wish to campaign or whatever. The problem with the Thurman rule is that it's not clear that he ever specified when exactly that was. Much like many things related to Strom Thurmond, it is a heavily politically expedient thing. Notably, Strom Thurmond was an advocate for segregation until black people got the vote, in which case then he turned around and started kissing their ass for votes. Right? So that evaporated like ice in the summer sun in his native South Carolina. And so the argument of the Thurman rule, and it does make a certain degree of sense. There is a point where if you were the Senate Judiciary Chairman, you would be able to say to your staff, look, this is an election year. It's January, February, March, April, something like that. If a Supreme Court justice died, within this time frame, we could reasonably expect to be able to have hearings and seat that the current president's new nominee, right? But there is a point where you would say, look, it's like, July, maybe iffy, but like September, October, we're just not going to be able to do it. It's just not feasible to really to get this person nominated and to go through all their paperwork and to have the ABA look at their records and to go through their case files and to schedule the hearings when, of course, the Senate goes into recess in early October and we don't have time for hearings, right? And as you might imagine, Lyndon Johnson nominated somebody in 1968 and Thurman allegedly blocked them because of the Thurman rule. He said there's not enough time. But he didn't specify when that limit actually is. It's not a hard and fast, like 30, 60, 90-day rule or anything like that. And as a consequence, anytime if you're a member of one party and another president of the other party nominates somebody in an election year, the Thurman rule sort of rises from the grave like a racist ghost for us to sort of dispense, right? But it was a good, who mentioned the Thurman rule? Okay, well then good for Hawk. Yeah, that's not surprised that he knew that.
Also, Teresa Childs challenges you about Calhoun being worse, but she feels that Cheney is the worst.
Who, Dick Cheney? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Was his wife, Lynn Cheney, who was a real, and his daughter, his Mary Cheney. Well, no, Mary Cheney is the one who's very quiet and keeps to herself, and it's Liz, I think, is Lynn is his wife, and Lynn was involved in the National Endowment for the Humanities Commission to write a national history standards curriculum in the 90s. She helped to write it and then campaigned against it because she's a bitch. And Liz is a carpetbagger who tried to pretend she's from Oregon, so she'd get Wyoming to get elected to her dad's old house seat, which blew up in her face because she's a dumbass. And her dad really kind of is a piece of shit. I don't like him very much. I really don't. I mean, he's good at doing the shitty stuff. That's the thing. Calhoun was Calhoun. I would you could entertain an argument between Calhoun and Cheney, but just for a variety of personal reasons, I really don't like Calhoun very much. I really don't like a guy who was the intellectual author of the justification for the Civil War. And it was just and mentored, by the way, one of the most execrable people in American history, who was James Henry Hammond, who had sex with a slave. She had a kid, then he had sex with the kid. So yeah, for real, for reals, for reals. Yeah, he bought a slave and had sex with her, and she had a kid, and then 16 years later, he had sex with the kid.
That was episode 1 of the Civil War series.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah, so I meant to mention at the beginning, by the way, but I had shots or whatever. That percolating in the back of my mind because of I think somebody tagged me on Facebook, might have been Chris Miller. Was about the Vietnam War. So I'm really thinking like a Vietnam War one is in order because I kind of want to talk about Vo Nguyen Giap and the VNQDD and the Viet Minh and like the Paris Peace Accords and the Geneva Accords and stuff and like the 50s in particular. So I mean, like if you're interested in that in the comments, let me know because I've been thinking about as you do, just thinking about the Vietnam War on and off. So anyway, moving on. So let's talk about the Supreme Court. The first case that I have is Marbury v. Madison. Marbury v. Madison. It's what is wrong with Marbury v. Madison? It's a good case. 1803.
That might in fact be when it's from.
Exactly. Try
Yeah.
to break it down and read it.
I mean, it's pretty easy. So what happens is
He's about to do it for you.
So what happens is Adams is the president, John Adams, 1796, 1800, right? And he loses the election of 1800, but in a midnight moment, in the very end of his term, in the lame duck period, the Congress passes the Judiciary Act, which substantially alters the way that the U.S. Supreme Court is operated. And in that is a provision that allows Adams to appoint what are called midnight appointments, a series of justices of the peace and federal judges that he will immediately, they create these new jobs, and then immediately the Federalist John Adams can appoint Federalists to these lifetime positions, serving in the newly expanded and empowered federal judiciary. Well, Adams leaves office, and the trick is he wrote they wrote the commissions. The commission is the physical piece of paper making you a judge, giving you the authority to hear cases and stuff. They wrote them. They filled them out, they signed them, but they didn't mail and deliver them to all the individual people who were made judges by this rule. And so a little while later, a guy named Marbury from Maryland sues the Jefferson administration because he said, look, I know I'm one of these judges, but I never got my commission, so I can't do my job. But like, I know that you have it. I know that you're sitting on it, right? And it turns out Madison, who came into office working for Jefferson as Secretary of State, I think. Madison, literally, he said, I sat at the desk vacated by my predecessor, and the seat was still warm from his body. And in the desk in the drawer, I found these commissions, which I decided not to deliver. After some conferring with Jefferson, Madison said, like, if we don't deliver these, we just don't make these people judges, right? I mean, if you don't want this guy to be a judge, he's a Federalist, and we're anti-Federalist. If you just don't deliver the commission, then he's not, he's not going to be a judge, right? And so Jefferson was like, great, just bury them. I throw them in a box and cover it, right? And so the Supreme Court under John Marshall heard the case, and they issued a writ of mandamus. No, I'm going to get him drunk.
A little bit shouty. We're not a full lecture.
I'm sorry, I've had some shots.
Yeah, I'm feeling attacked.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to attack you.
Especially already with the Marbury versus Madison comment.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to attack you. You're a lovely person.
One of the first cases we read.
Oh,
Ooh.
okay.
Well, I mean, if he's going to attack you, that's really not, this is our immediate audience, Tim and Corey. And so that's the question was that, what can the government be ordered to do, right? And Marbury says, look, if I'm a judge, I'm a judge. Right? They got to send me the paper. You can't, the act of signing it is what makes me a judge. The delivery is sort of, you have to do that. And can the Supreme Court order the government to do it? And at the same time, what Marshall sees the case is a case to sort of establish the authority of the court, right? And it's one of those things you got to use it to have it, right? And so Marshall splits the difference. He actually supports the writ of mandamus and says, you got to deliver this guy, whatever, kiss. And so, whatever. And so the court said that they supported the writ of mandamus, allegedly, right? And they said, you have to deliver this guy the commission. But then Marshall said, but actually, the section of the Judiciary Act that authorized all of this is actually unconstitutional. So in other words, the federal government had to comply with the Supreme Court and make Marbury a judge, except that the thing that made him a judge was unconstitutional anyway, so they didn't really. Like, in theory they would, but in practice they don't because it's unconstitutional, right? And then the real take-home here was that what Marshall abrogated to the court was the right of the Supreme Court to rule upon the constitutionality of both federal law and government action, a process that is known as judicial review. Yeah, and so, all right. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to attack you. No, that was not it was mean. It was a mean thing to say. Let me drink some more wine.
How is that one?
It's pretty good. I mean, like the Costco. Yeah, I mean the Costco's not bad. It's not bad, and I mean, like once you get like 3 glasses in, you don't even really. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The Costco wine is $5 a bottle. It's not bad, right? I mean, if Costco's gonna send me bottles of wine, I'll plug their crap all the time.
More for Costco at least stocking the wine.
Yeah. If Costco could just have it, so we could buy it, like that would be all right. Shots. All right. Let me get some more wine, so we can keep going here. Ooh. Oh.
That's a good after.
What? No, it's fine. So I'm feeling good. So Marbury v. Madison is important because it's sort of the archetype, the sort of progenitor of all the Supreme Court cases. Why does the Supreme Court have the authority to rule in like Whole Woman's Health v. Carhart that states can't enact abortion restrictions? Why does the Supreme Court have the right to rule in Hamdan v. Rumsfeld that military commissions are not acceptable as a venue to try people accused of terrorism? The answer is because Marbury v. Madison says the federal government's actions, the actions of the Congress, the laws of Congress, they're subject to the review of the Supreme Court, right? Always after the fact, never before, and yet they are, right? And the Supreme Court relatively rarely strikes down in the first like 80 or so years of American history government action or a federal law, but they reserve the right to, right? And there's a trio of cases that go along with it, right? It's McCullough v. Maryland and Martin v. Hunter's lessee, both of which are seen as sort of within 10 or 15 years of Marbury v. Madison, that also sort of encompass that. Martin v. Hunter's lessee is something about the state courts are subject to the jurisdiction of the federal courts, and McCullough v. Maryland is something about state governments or whatever. But those three together are seen as creating the basis for the power the Supreme Court enjoys up to the present day.
Comment from Hawk, it is emphatically the province and duty of the courts to say what the law is.
Well, I mean, Congress has to write it, but yeah. I mean, yeah, as I'm sure it's a quote from Marshall is what he. Yeah, he's probably quoting Marshall. All right, now we're going to talk about my least favorite Supreme Court case, but it's also my favorite to talk about, and that's Dred Scott v. Sanford. We're going to wind the clock forward. It's 1857, right? It's 1856. We got to argue a case. It's 1856. So when you talk about dates in the Supreme Court, remember the Supreme Court operates in what's called an October term. The October term 2020 is going to start in a hot minute, right? And so the way it works is that this year, 2020, the Supreme Court is going to go into session in October, and they sit from October into the summer of the next year. Marbury, yeah. And so the Supreme Court will start in October 2020 and go to like July 2021, June 2021. And that period, that term will be called October term 2020, right? It'd be October term 2020. And they typically tend to hear cases October, November, December, January, like February or so. And then they start issuing rulings towards the end of the year. And there's a certain sense of drama and theatricality around the Supreme Court where the Chief Justice Roberts these days will typically schedule the whopper decisions at the end. So the first few will be these really weird technical opinions that only Clarence Thomas writes and no one gives a shit about. And as he writes these bullshit things about like interpreting the Commerce Clause, Section 3, Paragraph 2, Sentence 4, Word 5, in light of, and he'll write like a 20-page opinion about it, and everyone's like, who gives a fuck? And so they'll do those first to be like, it's a Supreme Court opinion, it's not doing this. But then the big, like gay marriage, that'll be at the very end, right? It'll be in like June. Yeah, I mean, like, you want to see the big shit, you're gonna have to watch the whole thing. Like, we're not gonna. Yeah, exactly. It's like you got to sit through the overture to get to the climax, right? That's what she said. Yeah. And so, having said that, this is sort of comes into play with Dred Scott. It's argued in 1856, an election year, and the verdict is issued in 1857 during after the inauguration of the new president, right? So what's Dred Scott about? Dred Scott is about the only thing that you talk about in between about 1840 and 1861, which is slavery. What's going on in the comments? I mean, what's going on in the comments?
Ed Berger wants to know how many words Thomas has said on the bench.
Oh, he asked. It made news when he asked the question a couple of years ago, because it was NPR on the way to work. It was like 9:30 news bump or 9 o'clock news bump, and they were like, yeah, Justice Thomas asked the question on the bench for the first time in like 10 years the other day. Damn. All right. Okay. Where's the beef? And so that's fine. It's cool. Whatever. I'll see you later. We'll see about that. How you doing? Having said that, the Dred Scott's about the only thing that matters between 1840 and like 1861, which is of course slavery, right? It's about slavery. And so the case is that there's a guy, he's a doctor. He was hired by the Army to serve in a military base in the Illinois Territory and the Wisconsin Territory. So up he went in the 1840s, and he took a slave with him, Dred Scott. Right? Scott lived with his owner in the northern states for a while, married a free black lady named Harriet, so Harriet Scott, and then they came back south to, I want to say, Louisiana, Alabama, something like that. And so the owner got fired by the Army because he's a drunk, so they fired him. And so after conversations with people in the South, someone pointed out to Dred Scott, like, wow, you lived up north for like 10 or 15 years, like, aren't you a free person? Like, the places you went were free territories that turned into free states. Slavery wasn't legal, right? Slavery wasn't legal in those places. And Scott was like, And so he sued in court. And he said, because my owner took me to a place that did not allow slavery, I should be free, right? And the basis for this, by the way, is one of the most important legal decisions in the entire English-speaking common law history, a decision that was about the status of slavery within the British Empire, called the Somerset decision. It was a judge in Somerset County in England who heard the same case. Basically, they brought a slave from Africa or wherever, the Caribbean or wherever, to England, and he sued, and the judge was like, yeah, if you bring a slave to a place where slavery is not specifically enacted in the law, then they are not a slave. He argued that slavery is not a natural condition of a person, and in order to make slavery a thing, you have to sort of attach the chains, the fetters to them by means of some law that specifies certain people can in this jurisdiction be made slaves. These are the kind of people, and this is what it means, right? And he said in England, there's no law making a black person or any other kind of person a slave. And so the moment a black person puts his foot in England, there's no slavery, the chains kind of fall off. Legally, you can't keep them as a slave anymore. And so the Somerset decision was a big deal because it established in the English common law the idea that slavery was an artificial condition that had to be affirmatively maintained by the enactment of laws specific to the purpose. Yeah. Oh, it was like 1737 or something like that. Yeah, it was a while back. And it was in the American colonies. They did that. The slavery was affirmatively enacted in the American colonies. Like if you went to the Virginia colony or the Carolina colonies or Georgia, where they had slavery statutes. They did in the northern colonies as well, but gradually they were repealed or just they became irrelevant. And that was that, right? And so the first state to come into the Union that was born free, my father would be extremely proud to tell you, is Vermont. which enacted in its constitution an anti-slavery provision. And so New York was the last northern state to ban slavery in 1820, but when they did, no one was doing it. There was no there was like 2 slaves in the state, and so slavery was banned at that point. But the Somerset decision was big, and it exiled slavery from the center of the British Empire to the periphery, right, to places in Africa or the Caribbean in particular, which of course made it politically peripheral, even if it was economically really significant, right? Even if the Caribbean colonies made a lot of money, the slaves were sort of out of sight, out of mind, and of course that led to the freeing of the slaves in the British Caribbean colonies in 1833. The Jamaica was the big one. They freed a lot of people in Jamaica, and they wrote a bill and signed it, and that was that. Right, of course, 30 years before the American Civil War, and so that was sort of the question at odds in Dred Scott, right? Was what's the relationship of slavery to citizenship, to personhood in the United States of America? And so you got to understand, the judge issuing the majority opinion was the Chief Justice. His name is Roger P. Taney. Taney is spelled Taney, but I am assured by a guy I got drunk with in Italy on a tour that we took. Remember that guy? He wrote a book about Taney, which I subsequently bought and have read. It's a good book. His name was Simon. His last name was Simon, and he said the name is Taney, and so it's spelled Taney. It's not Taney. It's Taney. And so I hate Taney, but you could at least do him the justice of pronouncing his name correctly, better than he did for black people. Son of a bitch. So Taney had been appointed way back in 1850s. He's been appointed way back by Andrew Jackson. He'd been on the court for 20 years, right? And so Taney heard this case as it percolated up through the federal, court system, whatever. Everybody kind of knew that this was the thing that everybody had been kind of like half dreading, half wanting, a test case about slavery, right? I mean, it's like the gay marriage case, Obergefell v. Hodges, where it's like, on the one hand, this is it. The Supreme Court is going to be in a position where it unambiguously has to rule, is gay marriage legal or not? Like, it's just, that's all. There's the only, you either can skip the case and you can not hear it, or you accept it, right? Remember, the Supreme Court will hear any case that comes to it. You file a petition. It's called a writ of certiorari. If 4 justices agree that the petition has merit, then the case comes on the court's docket, right? And so it doesn't, only 4, right? And not a majority. And as you might imagine, every term the Supreme Court gets bombarded with cases, some of which are important, some of which they think are just stupid. This case has been decided before. Lots of weirdos and cranks petition the court in the hopes that their case might be important enough to be recognized. There's a whole bunch of clerks that their job is to sift through the cases and alert the justices if there's anything significant, interesting, or whatever. Right? If it's an important case like Bush v. Gore, you can bet that someone's going to call and say, we're currying over the petition, and the Chief Justice will say, we'll meet them at the door. Right? But of course, you never know what's going to show up. You never know what cases are being argued in federal court unless you're paying close attention, that are significant enough to sort of merit the justice's attention. Right? Is there action in the comments?
Teresa Childs had asked if Taney was a Native American name.
No.
Up about his distinction between Native Americans being able to have citizenship versus enslaved peoples.
Yeah, I don't think he did write a bunch of cases. Taney, I think he wrote cases about Native rights. Taney, well, and the lack thereof, right? So he's from Maryland, by the way. He's from Maryland, and so what? Okay, what did he say?
Certiorari.
He sucked my balls.
Certiorari, and I thought the same thing, but
yeah,
I'm not so.
Look, I had a couple shots. It can be whatever I want it to be. All right. That's right. That's right. That's right. Who's giving this report? Me or you chatterheads? Also, if anybody knows what that quote is from, you comment if you know what it's from. If you know who's giving this report, me or you chatterheads. Big ups to anybody that can name what it's from. Do you know?
I knew that, but I'm not going to say
Okay, don't say anything. I know you know because I've said it a million times. Because it's genius. Bats, the big bug scourge of the skies.
I still argue that would be correct.
Bats aren't bugs. Who's giving this report? You or me, chatterhead? You chatterheads or me? Oh God, I'm drunk.
Maybe slow down.
All right. So anyway, the case hits the Supreme Court, and again, it's one of those cases where, again, like the gay marriage case, the Supreme Court basically can not answer the writ, right? I mean, they could just not hear the case, and then whatever the lower court said goes, or they can hear it. But if you're, like Obergefell v. Hodges, if you're pro-gay marriage, it's like, this is it. This is the case where the Supreme Court's finally backed into a corner, and they have no choice but to say either gay people can get married or not. But on the end, maybe they say not, right? I mean, like, maybe you lose, right? And so everybody's kind of on edge about the outcome because we've had a couple decades of fighting in American politics over this issue of slavery, right? And so Tawney, he takes the case. The court takes the case, and I think the thing about Tawney is he thinks that he can do two things. He can settle this ruling or this issue by issuing a big sweeping ruling, right? And at the same time, he can also do that because he's the Chief Justice, right? Because he's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, what he says will go because of the respect for the court, its place in American life, and whatever, right? And so Tawney, unfortunately, is a real stupid ass because the second thing is true, provided he makes an effort to be fair, which he does not, right? And so he invalidates the second by making a mockery of the first, right? And so as a result, Dred Scott serves not to settle the crisis down and not to tamp down the agitation of slavery, but rather to make it significantly worse, right? To sort of put the proverbial gasoline on the fire, right? And so the first thing you got to understand is the Supreme Court decided the case very narrowly. They decided that Dred Scott was not a citizen because he was a former slave, and as a result, he did not have the right to sue in federal court. Right, and so you understand they could have left it at that. I mean, they could have said, "Look, we're sorry, Mr. Scott, you don't have the right to sue in court. Therefore, we can't hear this case. Right? You're not a citizen, so you've got no right to enter the federal court as a plaintiff. Right? I mean, the correct term is, of course, standing. Right? You may remember a few years ago when Prop 8 was passed in California, banning gay marriage. It was attacked in court almost immediately. Then Governor Schwarzenegger, who is great, other than the time he was not great with the secret family, but still, that's not that great. But the time he was also in, get to the chopper, it was great. But Governor Schwarzenegger was like, look, I don't like this. And his legal advisor was like, you don't have to do anything. If you don't think this is a good law, you could just decline to defend it, right? I mean, you could not send someone to court to argue the case. And so a group of conservative lawyers took it upon themselves to argue the position that Prop 8 was legal in California and it didn't violate the Equal Protection Clause of the California Constitution against the sort of gay rights activists who argued that it was unconstitutional. And in fact, a federal court agreed and they did the whole case, but the Supreme Court refused to take the case. When it was struck down. And the reason the Supreme Court gave is that the rando conservative lawyers didn't have standing to represent the state of California. The only people that can represent the state of California in court are people chosen by the governor or the legislature or some other person connected. Random people can't just take up arms to defend the state of California in court if the state of California has previously declined to do so. Right, and so they threw the case out and refused to accept it, and didn't accept their petition because they didn't have standing. Right, you can't do that.
And wasn't there a case, I don't know if it made the Supreme Court, but it was the father who didn't want his son saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and he didn't have standing for his son because he didn't have custody of his son.
Yeah, I think it was one of the guys connected to American Atheists who didn't like that his kid was saying that.
I'm not sure if that made the Supreme Court, but that was.
No, I think he got tangled up in the federal courts. But yeah, it's the same thing. The court was like, normally you don't have primary custody of your son, so you're like, you're not the only person that gets to argue this. And if your wife has custody of your son at least some of the time, and she doesn't have a problem with the kid saying the pledge, then like you don't really have a sort of leg to stand on, proverbially, right? Yeah, and so everybody's excited about Prop 8 because this is the case that's going to get gay marriage, and the Supreme Court tossed the case on standing, right? They were like, no, we're really sorry, we can't let any Tom, Dick, and Harry, defend laws in California if the governor has decided that we're not going to defend that law, right? That's his business, not yours, right? And so that's it. I mean, that's it. Tawney could have just said, look, that's it. But he didn't do it. He didn't do it. Instead, he issued other rulings. He said, in addition to Dred Scott not being a citizen, if Dred Scott was a citizen, taking a slave to a free state, like the case he describes, would not make the slave a free person. Taking a slave to a free state would not make them a free person. It would leave them a slave, which effectively invalidates the idea of free states. I just enslave my slaves in Virginia. I take them up to New York State. Done. They're not free, right? And so it really calls into question, as Abraham Lincoln famously said, the republic so divided cannot long endure. The house divided against itself cannot long endure. It must either be all of one thing or all of the other. Right, and so Tawney essentially laid that down on the table and said, Lincoln said this quote after, but basically Lincoln is right. You either you ban slavery or you extend it nationwide, And that's essentially what Tawney did, right? And he also said, by the way, that the Missouri Compromise of 1820, a deal worked out in Congress in 1820 and 21, brokered by the great compromiser Henry Clay, Whig senator from Kentucky, right? Henry Clay brokered this deal that basically said we're draw a line 30 degrees north, right, of the equator, and states above the line, territories above the line become free states, and territories below the line become slave states, and states come in pairs, one free and one slave forever. And that kept the balance. It kept the lid on American politics for 30 years. And retroactively, Tawney argued that that was unconstitutional because the federal government didn't have the right to legislate slavery. That was an issue left to the states. It was an issue relegated to the states by the Constitution. And so Tawney, I'll read a couple quotes from the opinion because it's whoppers. Tawney said, these are quotes from Tawney's opinion. He said, "We think that black people are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens of the Constitution and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which the instrument provides for and secures to citizens of the United States. On the contrary, they were at the time of America's founding considered as a subordinate inferior class of beings who had been subjugated by the dominant race and whether emancipated or not, yet remained subject to their authority and had no rights or privileges but such as those who held the power and the government chose to grant them. It is difficult at this day to realize the state of public opinion in relation to that unfortunate race, African Americans, which prevailed in the civilized and enlightened portions of the world at the time of the Declaration of Independence and when the Constitution of the United States was framed and adopted. They had for more than a century before been regarded as beings of an inferior order, and so far inferior, they had no rights which a white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit." And so Tawney basically argued that black people are not citizens, and even the limited rights that they enjoyed in the North might be called into question, right? They might not even have those rights. And so Corey's over here looking up Pete Buttigiegs on Amazon.com. Are you going to buy his husband's book? Oh, did you? Mm. Oh, okay. I was
Libraries are amazing things.
I know. I have a badass one upstairs. Boom. Also, what I was going to do is I was going to secretly monitor it on Amazon, and when it got cheap enough to use, I was going to buy her a copy and then anonymously send it to her house. But I guess we don't have to do that right now, so that's cool. Thanks for that.
You can still do the notorious RGB.
Okay, we'll look that one up. That was only $5. So I mean, that's pretty.
The kind of socialist party things that we
I mean,
have
that's
here.
right. I went to the library. It was lit AF, fam. As a kid, I got some books out of the library. Yeah. All right. And so the question you got to ask yourself is, what was the reaction to Tawney's decision? Well, and we got to mention, by the way, if you think Tawney is this dyed-in-the-wool mega slave owner, Southerner, we got to mention a few things. First, he's from Maryland. Maryland is the Diet Coke with lime of slave states. It's got very little slaves. The dominant business owning slaves in Maryland had been selling them to people in South Carolina for cotton production for like decades. I mean, it was just there were very few slaves in the state. Economically, they were not very productive. It was not a huge part of the economy. As a young man, Tawney's dad died and gave him all the slaves. A very common practice in the 19th century. Tawney freed them. He didn't want to own slaves. And you might say, well, okay, he just threw them out in the street, take the fuck out, I hate you, whatever. No, in fact, he got them all jobs and gave them leather wallets with $100 cash in the wallet for each slave. And so he was like, look, I'm going to free you, but I'm not going to just kick you out and cast you into the streets with no skills or capital or whatever. Instead, he got everyone a job and said, look, there's a job waiting for you. Here's $100. Go get a start on your life. Get a place to live. Go to work in your job and then make something of yourself. The world is your proverbial oyster, right? And so it really casts a light on the perception of him as this arch pro-Southern jurist to sort of look at this. But again, on the other hand, the decision he rendered in Dred Scott v. Sanford was extremely pro-Southern. It essentially validated the pro-Southern view that had prevailed in the Congress, among others, John C. Calhoun and James Henry Hammond et al., for decades, right? I mean, he basically gave them everything they wanted, right? I mean, it would sort of be like the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade and not just banning abortion, but like, punishing anyone who'd ever gotten an abortion, anyone who'd ever given an abortion, and anyone who ever publicly said they were pro-choice had to go get punched in the face or something. I mean, it was like this really, 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 this really, really sort of provocative decision. Oh, okay, it's guest cat, Isabella. You don't like Justice Tawny either because you are a cat. So, okay.
Also, heads up.
Heads up if you are in one of Matt's actual live classes this semester. I believe one of the tests this weekend has a bonus question on it asking what our cat's name is. So here is your hint right now. Her name is Isabella of Castile.
Isabel Castile.
I love you, Isa. You bite me. Hurts. Talking to you. Yeah. All right. So the reaction is it's explosive. It galvanizes the nascent Republican Party, and we should mention the bullshit that Taney did when he issued the opinion. So the presidential election of 1856, Franklin Pierce is the president. He was a drunk son of a bitch and a pro-Southern asshole. Right. So he couldn't win re-election. Also, his kid died, and he was drinking himself into an early grave. So that was the end of that. So the Democrats nominated James Buchanan. Buchanan's big advantage was that he'd been out of the country as minister to England. He was ambassador to the court of St. James in England. So he had been out of the country for like a decade. So he hadn't been involved in any of this horse shit. Right. So that work Buchanan was it. Right. We should mention, by the way, Buchanan, probably gay, had a relationship probably with a guy in Washington, D.C. for a long time. Never married, only bachelor president, as it turned out. Not the only widower. Right. That was Andrew Jackson, because his wife Rachel died before the election. He was not there's only been two presidents that have gotten a divorce: the current occupant of the White House and Ronald Reagan, who was divorced from his wife Jane Wyman in the 50s. But Buchanan was the only bachelor president. Yeah, what are you thinking about? I feel like there was a marriage in the White House. Yeah, well, Wilson got married to Edith Bowling Galt. Good call, Edith Bowling Galt. They married when Wilson was in his second half of his second term. Want to hear a good joke, Wilson joke? What did this is good in your laugh? What did Edith Bowling Galt say to Woodrow Wilson when he proposed to her? The answer is she didn't say anything, but she fell out of bed. Because they were fucking. Yeah, because they were fucking.
She didn't laugh.
Yeah, it was a good joke. It's a good joke. It's a good joke because according to early 20th century mores, she was giving it away and Wilson was picking it up, and they were not married, and that's totally bad. Yeah. It was the teens. Yeah, it was like 1917. So whatever. Wilson can go die in a fire. He's a fucking asshole.
That's how you really feel.
He's the worst, and I hate him more than anything.
Slow down a little.
It's fine.
Don't be so sick tonight.
Okay, I'll just take a minute. All right. Okay.
I didn't say stop. I just said slow down.
All right. Okay. So, having said that, it is hot under the lights. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, first off, my mother totally got. She knew who said your chowder head's closed.
Oh, who's that?
My mother knew who said it. Yeah. I'm displaying it on the screen. Why are you on your phone?
Yeah. And who it was? Did she guess correctly? Can you share her guess with us? It was Calvin Hobbs. It was Calvin giving a report about bats to his class. And crickets? About what?
Your Wilson joke.
It was a good joke.
Everyone's a critic.
I was a critic. Yeah. I was a critic. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, you want to hear an even better joke? This is a joke. This is a 1600s English political joke. How are a wig and a bald head? No, I'm sorry. I'm dropping it because I'm drunk. How are heaven and a bald head the same? A wig will be found on neither. Boom. Boom. That was
nothing. That was an incredible joke. It's a joke about how wigs.
Opponents of the royal party in the British Revolution are going to go to hell because neither heaven nor a bald head have a wig. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's one of the best jokes I've ever heard.
I'm sorry, I was distracted because I was reading Aaron's comment here that he's pretty sure that during one of your lectures about Wilson, you said, if I ever saw Wilson in my car mirror, I'm not sure if I wouldn't reverse.
I'm not going to lie.
I'm not going to.
If Wilson stepped in front of my car, I might not gas it, but I'm not going to hit the brake. Right? I mean, because he's a pretty louche asshole, right? Letting the British run our foreign policy for us. So What a jackass. Appointing Colonel House to be his only representative with him to the Versailles Conference, which totally fucked up everything. Sure, it's fine. You're great, Wilson. No big deal. You're not the worst racist ever. No, it's fine. So what can we say about Dred Scott Sanford? I mean, the Republican Party is just beginning to get organized. It ran California explorer and bon vivant John C. Fremont, who is married, by the way, to Jessie Fremont, daughter of Thomas Hart Benton, Missouri Senator extraordinaire. It ran Fremont in 1856. He got his ass handed to him by the Buchanan, because Buchanan's an asshole. But it provided this incredible rallying cry, right? And we gotta mention the skullduggery that Tawney engaged in when Buchanan came back to the country and accepted the nomination and became president. Tawney met with him after the election and was like, hey, bro, like I just issued this ruling. We just wrote it. We're getting ready to issue it in a couple months. It's gonna totally change everything. And he let Buchanan have a preview. And in Buchanan's inaugural address in March 1857, he actually gave a preview, and he said, I think the Supreme Court is going to issue a ruling that will totally change everything. And it's like, yeah, you dumb shit. Everyone's going to be fucking pissed about it. But you're too stupid to know that. Right? And Buchanan believed Tawney and agreed that the fact that Tawney said it from the Supreme Court bench in a robe meant that people would accept it regardless of its legality, constitutionality, rationality, or anything else. Morality, yeah, and of course, and should the Supreme Court Chief Justice be giving the president-elect previews of Supreme Court opinions that have not yet been issued? No, the fuck is that? Right, and on top of that, by the way, Kansas, which had been in a constitutional crisis, had just concluded an election in which the Democratic Party had won by massive, wholesale, and often violent fraud, and produced a constitution written in the city of Lecompton. The Free Soilers, the anti-slave party, had seceded and written a constitution in Lawrence, Kansas, and they both had been submitted to the U.S. Congress for approval to make Kansas either a slave or free state. Buchanan actually agreed that the Lecompton Constitution should be issued, despite the fact, as people pointed out, that there was massive electoral fraud in Kansas. The fuck is that? But again, Buchanan, right? It's Buchanan for you. I don't know what to say about the guy. What can you say? And so, having said that, Dred Scott provided exactly the shot in the arm that the Republican Party needed, right? If you were a Republican candidate in 1858, right, what did you say? You said, we need to address Dred Scott. We need to address Dred Scott. And it was exactly the organizing principle the Republicans needed to draw together the disparate factions of anti-slave advocates in the North, right? The Free Soilers, the moralistic anti-slave crusaders in the abolitionist movement, people who opposed the supposed anti-slave or pro-slave conspiracy, the slave power. All of them could agree that Dred Scott was a perfect example of what happened when manful, moral people didn't oppose the spread of slavery to the Western states. And so you can thank Tawney for that. Right? So we mentioned, by the way, in the long run, Tawney issued one of the more infamous Supreme Court decisions, Ex parte Merryman, in 1861. Right? And so you remember Ex parte Merryman? It never came up?
It probably did.
Damn.
We're talking second year, first semester.
Yeah, it's a while ago. Yeah. Ex parte Merryman was Abraham Lincoln prorogued the Maryland state legislature to prevent them from meeting and issuing a declaration of secession in 1861. And along with a number of other individuals, Lincoln arrested and detained a bunch of people in Maryland who he is suspected of being pro-Southern secessionists. And so one of them got someone to file in court a writ of habeas corpus, a legal writ demanding the presentation of a person in front of a court. Right? And having said that, habeas corpus is one of the oldest rights that you have. It goes back to the British common law. You're securing your person is what it means. And it means that a court has to produce, if a court asks the government to produce you, they have to do it. The court has to put you in court, and the judge has to be able to ask questions of you, like, are you being tortured? Like, have you been charged of a crime? The government has to say, we're detaining this person because they've been charged with a crime, because we have evidence, which is this evidence. They can't just lock you in jail forever and throw away the key, as was common in European monarchies around the time that the British decided that this was a thing we should really be pissed about, right? The only right you have in the U.S. Constitution specified in the body of the Constitution and not in the Bill of Rights is the writ of habeas corpus. It was so important that the Founding Fathers put it in the body of the text as opposed to relegating it to later amendments that were added to the Constitution. right? And so, having said that, are you checking me out? Okay. Because I feel like you were. And so, yeah.
Like fact checking him out.
It's cool. It's because you're an actual lawyer, so I assume that like much like Hawk, you have a greater professional knowledge of these things than I perhaps do. I guess yeah. If we argue about civil procedure,
That I would know more about.
yeah. So I get. Do you know about the difference between substantive and procedural due process?
Why am I being grilled here? That's my lecture.
Because I got into a long discussion with Hawk about that one time, and he explained it to me, and it didn't make any fucking sense. I understand quantum physics more than I understand the difference between substantive and procedural due process. So anyway, in ex parte Merriman, Tawney actually supported the writ of habeas corpus and was like, yeah, the Lincoln administration can't just lock this guy up because they think he might vote or support a secessionist movement in Maryland. And basically what Lincoln told the army was, fuck that guy, I don't give a shit what he says. That's the exact quote. Lincoln said that. And what the army did was when Tawney was like, hey, here's a writ of habeas corpus, they were like, and that was it. They didn't let Merriman out, and they ignored it. And so as a result, Maryland did not secede from the Union, a position that would have made the federal government's existence in Washington D.C. basically untenable, right? And that was that. Lincoln ignored the Supreme Court. He defied the court in the same way that Jackson had in the 1830s, right? And so, not one of the greatest moments in the Lincoln presidency. Lincoln always argued, as shitty as it was necessary because the bigger issues of the survival of the government were at stake in that instance, right? And so it's a tough call. If there's any person in American history I trust to break the Constitution with the best intentions at heart, it's Abraham Lincoln. He was the greatest president. If you disagree, fuck off my YouTube channel. And so, on the other hand, the whole point of the Constitution is you can't break it. Like the point is no one breaks it, and Lincoln did, and it's a tough call, right? And so that's a difficult thing to sort of get around, right? And so, having said that. Tawney died in like 1860, like 3 or 4, I want to say, and Lincoln appointed Salmon P. Chase of Ohio, one of his former cabinet members, to I think Tawney's seat. And Lincoln didn't go to Tawney's funeral, by the way. It was a big Washington funeral, it was a big thing. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court dies. Lincoln didn't go because he hated Tawney so much for Dred Scott v. Sanford. A rare moment where Lincoln allowed his political animus to color his actions, right, as opposed to behaving in that way. Right, and so Dred Scott v. Sanford was 1864 was a big deal, yeah, and so we mentioned ex parte Merriman too. So we have questions in the comments.
Hawk mentions that you have something in common with several Supreme Court justices by not the difference between
substantive and procedural due process
and procedural.
It's some bullshit.
Remember, I said I muted you.
My bad, dog.
You have to wait a second while I unmute you.
Okay, now you can criticize.
No, I mean the difference between substantive and procedural due process is like theology. It's like it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it's fun. She's fine.
My mom asks what the take on Brown v. Board of Education is, which I know you're planning on getting to, but I think the point of that is let's do another case.
Yeah, we're gonna get to Brown.
Yeah, that was
good case. So easy, you're super fat right now. The difference between substantive and procedural due process is like the most arcane thing I've ever heard in my life, and it literally doesn't make any sense. I gotta get a book about it at some point. Yeah, I mean, yeah, a little bit. The last shot I had was only half a shot, so it's fine. Yeah, it was a shot and a half, and then like a glass of wine. Was it 2 glasses of wine?
I mean, it is liqueur in that thing though, and not wine or something like that. So it's like 15% alcohol.
I'm feeling good. I'm all right. Yeah, we'll bring Michelangelo out in a little bit. I mean, it's a shame this just couldn't be like Tiki Krang or Tiki Shredder or Tiki Donatello. So, well, fine. And so the next case we're going to talk about, I think, is one of the more infamous Supreme Court cases, which is Plessy v. Ferguson, right? Which probably everybody's heard of, but you got to talk about it. So Plessy v. Ferguson is 1896, and the question is, Louisiana has segregated streetcars for black and white people. So black people have since become free; slavery's over. But with the end of Reconstruction in the American South, there is this reimposition of racially based discrimination in the South, not slavery, but segregation. And so the question is, the attorney Albion Tourguet, noted abolitionist and sort of man about town, gadfly even, he brings this case on behalf of Homer Plessy, right? Homer Plessy is a mixed race man who is relegated by, of course, his skin color to the segregated streetcars in New Orleans, and he sues. And the case narrows the Supreme Court considerably. The case narrows by virtue of the Supreme Court's ruling the 14th Amendment considerably. And so the 14th Amendment had been passed in the aftermath of the Civil War to cement the civil rights of African Americans, and also as a big fuck you to President Andrew Johnson, one of my least favorite presidents ever because he's a stupid racist asshole and I hate his dumb face. Johnson was a Tennessee senator, the only senator to not secede from the United States Senate when his state seceded in 1861, state of Tennessee. He stayed in the Senate. He said, I've been elected to the United States Senate to represent the state of Tennessee, not to another Senate composed of people from a different country, right? And so you think he's all right. Lincoln appointed him governor of Tennessee when it might have broken in half, right? And the western part was very pro-slave because there were a lot of slave owners there. The eastern half was not very pro-secession. The eastern half was not pro-secession because there's no slaves there. It's super weird when you mention that, by the way, because it's almost like there's a correlation between support for the institution of slavery and secession, which implies that slavery and secession are interrelated. But that's crazy. Oh my god! And so Johnson's governor of Tennessee, but eventually it fails, and he retreats north to Kentucky with a lot of Tennessee dudes that join the army and then go invade their home state. Right? So Lincoln in 1864 picked Johnson as his vice president. He ditched Hannibal Hamlin, Republican from Maine, abolitionist. And so why did Lincoln do this to get elected? 1864, he was convinced he's going to lose. He's convinced he's going to lose, right? And so he picked Johnson to help reassure his election. Lincoln's elected 1864, boom, overwhelming, it's amazing. 1865, April, he's shot, he's dead. Johnson's the president. Johnson rapidly reveals that he views Reconstruction less as a matter. I'm just looking at the cat who's staring at the dog. He's super fat right now. You're fat. It's a fat one. And so Johnson rapidly reveals he supports Reconstruction in terms of demanding the Confederate States come back into the Union, to abandon their pretensions at independence, to submit to the rule of the government. But he does not view Reconstruction as having anything in terms of meaningfully giving civil rights to Black Americans. Former slaves, as Lyndon Johnson would say 100 years later, you can't take somebody who's in chains and then chop the chains off and then let them enter a foot race that they've been running for the previous 100 years with chains on and expect them to compete fairly, right? That's just not going to work. And so Johnson, on the other hand, bears none of that sort of liberality in his heart. Famously, he said at one point in an interview with abolitionists that this is a white man's government, and I would wish that it would remain so, right? And so, that was his attitude. And so the Congress took control of the Reconstruction policy of the country and started passing federal laws over Johnson's veto. And because he's a stupid ass that didn't understand the Constitution, when they overrode his vetoes, he bitched to everybody in public that they were violating the Constitution, which is a dumbass thing to say because Johnson's a dumbass, frankly, right? It's like read Article 1, right? Read Article 2. It's in there. You're literate, I guess, right? And so I don't understand. But anyway, as a result, the 14th Amendment, remember the 13th Amendment says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States save as punishment for a crime duly convicted. The 14th Amendment says a whole bunch of shit, but the big thing it says, Section 1, Article 1, it says that anybody born in the United States or subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. And that no state may make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of any citizen of the United States, nor may deprive anybody of their constitutional rights, save by due process of law, right? Which is frankly about 90% of the exact quote, which I'm amazed that I got because I'm pretty fucking drunk. It's like not exact, but it's like almost, right? I have it over here. If I fucked it up really bad, I brought my my pocket Constitution so I could read it. So I brought my own pocket Constitution, which is pretty beat up because I carried it around all the time at school. And so, having said that, so the question in the 14th Amendment was like, what does that mean? Well, there's some people, there's a scholar, Cale Reed Amar, who's been proposed as a potential Supreme Court nominee a bunch of times, but he's obviously, he's a brown guy and also he's liberal. So, you don't expect Donald Trump to support that. But Having said that, he's said a bunch of times, he's written a book that I have in my library where he basically says the entire like constitutional law exists in two phases. There's all the shit that happened before the 14th Amendment where the law was one way, and then when the 14th Amendment happens, it just changes everything. And he said it incorporates the Bill of Rights into the states. The states are now obligated to abide by the same constitutional strictures that the federal government had previously been obligated to abide by because of Amendments 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Right? And so, Isa, what's up? Yeah, Squeak.
Tim.
Yeah, it's your friend Tim. You're going to hang out with Tim because he's around? Yeah, it's cool. Whatever. We'll remember that later. You know, some treats later? I'm just saying, whatever. It's fine. So, bite you later. And so, having said that, do you want cameo on the show again? No? You're in every class. Every class I teach on Zoom, you come in and everybody likes you. So.
I don't know, you called her fat a minute ago.
She knows that I do it from a place of love.
I mean, fat's a term that you mentioned when you talk to cat.
Yeah, she's a fat cat. She's my fat cat. She's my fat. I ask about her. I ask. Hawk had a cat named Fatty. I used to ask about Fattest, the fattest of Catty, because it was fat status. It was fattest. It was a cool thing. It's cool. It's cool. 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 And so, having said that, so the 14th Amendment, what did it mean, right? Well, the Supreme Court narrowed that shit almost immediately. There's a case in the 1870s, the slaughterhouse cases, where you know that one. So what happened is back in New Orleans, they got a bunch of butchers and they kill a bunch of animals and they dump that shit in the fucking Mississippi River and it's fucking disgusting. So the city of New Orleans builds a slaughterhouse facility in the edge of the city, like way out in the fucking nowhere. And they pass a law, a city ordinance or whatever, saying if you want to be licensed to work as a butcher in New Orleans, you have to rent space from us in this facility and dispose of your offal, your pig guts and shit, all the way out here a ways away. And the butchers sue. And they say that this ordinance violates their 14th Amendment rights. It violates their constitutional rights under Amendment, 4 or whatever. But that matters because the 14th Amendment makes that amendment apply to the states and the city government of New Orleans, which is interesting. And that's, in a way, the case is accurate. On the other hand, it sort of rests on this really novel interpretation of what those rights are. I mean, the city governments issue this public health license and this public health regulation. It's weird. But anyway, the court rules in favor of the butchers and dramatically narrows what it interprets the 14th Amendment to mean in terms of the rights given to you by the amendment or the rights that the states are obliged to protect, right? And so you fast forward to Homer Plessy, who argues basically look, I'm being told to sit in the back of the stagecoach or the streetcar because I'm black, and that violates my equal protection under the U.S. Constitution. And the Supreme Court actually disagrees, 8-1. 8-1, they disagree. 8 justices say no problem, whatever, it's fine. One justice, John Marshall Harlan, dissents and argues that this is some bullshit. We'll get there in a second. The 8 justices argue that the 14th Amendment doesn't really apply to that, and they famously argue in what's often known as the doctrine of separate but equal, that if Homer Plessy is being treated separately by the legislature, it doesn't, as long as he's been given equal seating, right? If each streetcar has a black and a white section and they're the same size and whatever, then who's being discriminated against, right? I mean, if you argue that all black people have to come in and sit at this part of the restaurant and all white people, if the restaurant sides are the same and the booths are the same and the food is the same and the service is the same, who gives a shit? You're not being discriminated against, right? But of course, that's bullshit, right? I mean, of course, that's not the reality of what's going on. The Supreme Court basically covers its eyes and then issues the ruling by imagining what they think the city of New Orleans is doing to black people, and then saying that what we imagined isn't so bad, and the reality is, well, we don't care a shit about that, so who cares, right? And so it's sort of like if somebody commits a crime and you say, I don't want to hear the actual evidence that you're presenting about the crime that was committed against you. I'm going to imagine a story in which the person did the thing to you, but you really made it a mountain out of a molehill, so it's not a crime, so whatever, charge is dismissed. And it's like, that's not how the law works. You can't just imagine that, like, well, I don't really think that guy assaulted you. I mean, your face is all fucked up, but it doesn't seem like he would do that, so guess what? Charge is dismissed. Yeah.
Brock Turner.
I mean, he's like Brock Turner. He was a swimmer. So I guess the fact that they caught him raping a girl in a dumpster, but like he was a nice kid I mean, other than the time he got caught raping. But it's like, yeah, that's the same kind of bullshit. Like, you can't, like, the crime is the crime, the evidence is the evidence, right? And the Supreme Court essentially chooses to create a fantasy version of the American South, sort of Lord of the Rings bullshit, and then be like, this isn't so fucking bad. And so they argue infamously that if people are accorded separate treatment by the law, but that treatment is substantially the same, then there's nothing constitutionally wrong. And the doctrine in Plessy v. Ferguson 1896 is usually known as separate but equal. Right, separate but equal, right? And so it affirms the legality of the practice of segregation. I should mention, we got a couple quotes I can read. This is from Harlan's dissent. Harlan lays this shit down. He says, everyone knows that the statute in question had its origin in the purpose not so much to exclude white people from railroad cars occupied by blacks as to exclude colored people from coaches occupied or assigned to white persons. The thing to accomplish was, under the guise of giving equal accommodation for whites and blacks, to compel the latter to keep to themselves while traveling in railroad coaches. No one would be so wanting in candor as to assert the contrary, parentheses, except my dumbass colleagues. Right? And he said, but in view of the Constitution, in the eye of the law, there is in this country no superior dominant ruling class of citizens. There's no caste here. Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect to civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law. The humblest is the peer of the most powerful. The law regards man as man and takes no account of his surroundings or of his color when his civil rights are guaranteed by the supreme, as guaranteed by the supreme law of the land are involved. In my opinion, the judgment this day rendered will in time prove to be quite as pernicious as the decision made by this tribunal in this Dred Scott case. And so Harlan laid down what is often called the Great Dissent. He said basically the Supreme Court is full of shit. This decision is stupid, and only a moron would think that black people are somehow being treated fairly when it is obviously they that are being excluded from white streetcars as opposed to white people being excluded from fictional black streetcars, right? And it turned out Harlan would have to wait for like 60 years for his vision to come true in the 1956 case Brown v. Board. Right, and so, but Harlan's dissent was sort of a powerful marker of like this is he's right, but of course 8-1, right? It is what it is, 8-1, right? So, do we have any comments? I'm gonna pour some wine. I was thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, my mother comments that, yes, this is all preamble to Brown v. the Board of Education. Teresa wants to know if this show happens at the Kitchen Island because of COVID. And the answer to that is yes, this happens now because of COVID. And our friends were like, we miss hearing Matt ramble about politics while he's drunk. And so Professor Matt is Drunk was born from that. We're toying with the idea of trying to do this outside at some point, or I'm not sure how to decide when to do that based on weather and bugs and that sort of thing, because we live on a pond, and so our backyard gets pretty buggy at certain hours. And windy sometimes, and rainy, as it is right now. But like that's the thing we've talked about a little bit.
She's like,
yeah, Issa does not give a shit about him right now. But if that happens, Teresa, because I know you're local to me, I will definitely let you know when that is. And
unmute you real fast.
Unmute you. Hang on, let me mute myself first so I don't get an echo.
Yeah, we did have a bunch of, like, a couple of the neighbors. There's one of the neighbors was like, oh, it's not convenient for me to, like, come and whatever, watch and whatever. And yeah, and she's like putting the kids to bed. So we had mentioned at one point about doing it in the driveway so that she could watch.
Yeah, from the window.
I mean, she should sit across the street.
We do it for 4th of July and things like that whenever they let the fireworks off in our own driveway. It's not loud enough.
Isa. I'm sorry. I was in teacher voice. I was in when you have the.
For a 250-person lecture hall, not.
I mean, I'm
3 people.
my bad, dog. A little bit. I was also very passionate about the fact that I had a couple shots. All right, so.
Okay, so we're on board
I
now.
mean, oh God, no. We haven't done court packing in the Lochner era.
Yes, I'm hoping to get a special guest for court packing, but he's too shy.
Who is it? Oh, are you gonna have him come on too?
He declined.
I can't. Is he? I don't.
Is it possible who has to correct everyone's pronunciations of Latin legal terms?
Yeah, it's Hawk.
He's too shy.
He's too shy. Yeah.
He's not prepared to lecture off the cuff as Matt does.
Oh, I mean, you just got to get ready. Just a couple shots, just the tip. It's fun. So is he? Well, I don't want to say that. I don't want to. I don't want to say that. I'll ask him later. And so yeah, we got. I have 3 note cards left. We have Lochner, and then we have court packing, and then we have Brown v. Board.
I mean, he's still in the comments being very excited about court pack.
We're gonna get he's my hard bud. We're gonna get there. We're gonna talk about court packing because it's some shit. I love it because it's politics, baby. And so, all right, let's talk about Lochner. Lochner's 1905 Supreme Court case, which is one of the most infamous Supreme Court cases. So this is the progressive era. So you got the progressives are these nerds, and the progressives argue that the government can intervene in the economy to benefit ordinary people, and the progressives, they're the ancestors of modern liberals, right? I mean, like modern liberals are progressive, and we've come full circle because modern day liberals that call themselves millennials, call them who are liberal, just use the term progressive instead, right?
Progressive and liberal is not the same.
I mean, they're related, but it's like we've come full circle.
Related, but not
Yeah,
the same.
but like 20 years ago, nobody used the term. 20 years ago, like nobody used the term progressive. Like a person who today is a progressive wouldn't have called themselves that. But like 80 years ago, it would like that's what people called themselves, right? I mean, 100 years ago because it's like 1920 shit. It's been a while. It's been a minute.
2020.
It's been a minute. Is Corey's didn't have any champagne? So, all right. So
Fall out of the chairs.
so what you have is
Your couch is all covered in toys.
yeah, we got to clean that off. My bad. So what you have is this huge amount of progressive activism in the country, and you got to understand something about progressives. They tend to be really like rationalist, data-driven people, right? And so the iconic progressive is the lawyer Louis Brandeis, and Brandeis writes these briefs called Brandeis briefs for various like causes. Like you have some problem, you come to him, he'll advocate for you, and he writes this brief which is like heavily fact-based. He gathers social statistical data, social science data. Is that a big ass comment? Oh, because you had your hand. Okay, I was like, what? So Brandeis will submit this like 300-page brief where he's like, okay, here's like 500 like, footnotes and all these facts and citations and data I gathered, interviews I did, and whatever. And so it's the progressives tend to be this sort of really heavily fact-based people, right? I mean, they're the kind of people who are like, should we pass a minimum wage? Well, let's do like an investigation. Let's conduct an experiment and give people a minimum wage. Let's gather social, like, statistical data and whatever. And so, having said that, the case that comes in front of the court in 1905 is Lochner v. New York. It's a progressive case, right? It's about a minimum wage that is passed by, I think, New York City, right? And so basically the court is asked, is the state mandating that all workers be paid a minimum wage? Is that constitutional, right? And the court says no. And so what the court says is that making a minimum wage is a violation of the freedom of workers. And they invent a new freedom that you didn't know you had. It's called the freedom of contract. When you go to work at a place, you go to sign up a contract and go to get a job, it's a negotiation in the minds of the court that takes place in this utopian realm. It's a perfect universe. There's a shining area, marble, white marble and gold everywhere, and you sit down at the table, an equal, and your boss sits down as a table at an equal, and you negotiate a contract of employment. And then maybe you go outside and you give each other handies in the parking lot or some shit. And so the court argues, it's the parking lot of the Sizzler. I don't know. Wherever you do that. I don't know. It's Jersey, baby. Applebee's, yeah. I feel God this Chili's tonight. Yes. And so the court essentially argues that when you sit down with your boss to negotiate a contract, your hypothetical boss, you're an equal and you have total freedom, and the government should not sit at the table and effectively say, hey, if you're going to hire this guy, you got to pay him at least $1 an hour or whatever the minimum wage is. And the problem is, of course, as with Plessy v. Ferguson, the court's not really listening to reality. When I go to get a job at a big factory, I'm not negotiating with the factory owner as an equal, right? There are probably some employers who can negotiate with their prospective employees on a position of parity, right? I mean, like, I don't know, I guess like LeBron James, when he goes to sign a contract with a basketball team, can say, look, I'm fucking LeBron James. I'm one of the best basketball players alive. We have to negotiate as equals because if you don't give me a better deal, I'll just go back and play for, like, who do you play for, Cleveland or whatever? Right? I don't know, basketball. right? But like the vast majority of employees, hashtag sports. Sports. I love sport. I love sport. If 500 points for Hawk if he posts the sport gift in the comments. And so oh yeah, it's a gift that we always use of Mitt Romney playing Jenga, where Mitt Romney it's like a super Jenga set, and Mitt Romney like touches it and it falls apart, and he like flails at it because he's fucking Mitt Romney, right? And so anytime it comes up, that's our go-to. And so it's just nonsense, right? I mean, like when you go to get a job, you need a job, right? Nobody's rolling in job offers for the most part, and so when you go to get hired, you can't. It's not like you say to your employer, "Fuck you, I'm not going to take this job. You got to give me a better wage." They're going to be like, "Oh shit, okay." They're going to be like, "Look, fuck you, get out. Take what we're offering, or fuck off," right? And so the court essentially creates again this fantasy land where employees and employers meet as equals, and the government interfering in this process limits the liberty of employees to argue for a better or more favorable contract. It's bullshit, right? But right of contract becomes settled law until 1937. It's a one. It's great. It's fine. And so, having said that, that the courts they throw out all minimum wage laws. There's another one in the teens where Brandeis argues in Boston for a minimum wage law for bakers or some shit, and the court throws it out. And 4 of the conservative justices, I forget their names, but they become the known as the 4 horsemen. And anytime a progressive law comes in front of the court, they strike it down. And they love to do it. They don't just say like, we don't think this law is constitutional. There's like the stupid progressives think this law is cool, so fuck those morons. And they always find a 5th vote, and they always strike it down. And so for 2 decades, 3 decades, what?
No, that's fine. I'm thinking of the foreshadowing that you're speaking right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, whatever. And so for 32 years, the Supreme Court like delights in striking down progressive legislation, right? And this whole period is known as the Lochner era. And some people have argued that the Lochner decision was totally stupid. The Supreme Court can't just invent shit. It can't just come up with stuff out of whole cloth, right? Other people, libertarians, have argued, but like we're libertarians, so we agree with Lochner. So the fact that it's constitutionally stupid doesn't matter to us because we don't care, right? Which is, I guess if you're a libertarian, that's certainly your prerogative. But and so just FYI, if you're really libertarian, go back and read Hayek and really read Hayek and realize that actual modern 21st century libertarianism is way more radical than what Hayek proposed. Just saying, the road to serfdom is not a guarantee. The road to serfdom is much smarter than Ayn Rand, and if you get your libertarianism from Ayn Rand, go fucking read Hayek first. Because Ayn Rand was a wacko, and Hayek is much more measured than she was. Ludwig von Mises is a dipshit. I don't like that guy. So anyway, it's telling that former crazy person Michelle Bachmann famously said, "I love Ludwig von Mises. He's my favorite." And it's like, oh, okay. Sure. So anyway, there's a whole thing on the campaign trail. They asked her, like, what's your favorite book? She's like, oh, Ludwig von Mises. God told her to run for president, which raises certain questions like, what does God sound like when he talks to you? And also, God wanted you to lose, like it didn't work out for you. So I guess God wanted you to run and have the experience of losing. It raises certain questions about people who hear God's voice directly. Right? Like, are you a prophet? Are you the Esther predestined to lead people to Christianity? Why, if so, why didn't you win the election? Raising questions. Just asking questions. So anyway, when did Lochner end? That's an important question. So by the 1930s, progressives were at a fever pitch. It didn't seem to matter, right? I mean, Wilson nominated people to the court, but they were a little on the conservative side. There was very many of them. And then in the 20s, you had 3 Republican presidents in a row: Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Hoover, who cemented the progressive or the conservative majority in the court, right? We should mention, by the way, Warren G. Harding was the only president whose middle name is the name of an angel from the Old Testament, Gamaliel. He's also a complete, absolute son of a bitch who fucked his neighbor in Cleveland behind his wife's back, behind his wife and the neighbor's wife's back. Yeah. What? I mean, Harding slept with his next door neighbor's wife.
That's not what you just said. You said behind his neighbor's wife's back.
Well, behind his wife's back and behind his wife's, the neighbor's back, whatever. Yeah, sure. And by the way, he wrote.
Did he have sex with an
It was a woman. It was a woman. Harding was not imaginative enough to conceive of anything other
We've
than
already talked about our gay president.
yeah, missionary with the lights on. I mean, give me a break. And famously, he wrote her love letters where he named his penis Jerry, and he said at one point, he's like, "You want to hang out with Jerry again?" Because he wants to hang out with you. And at another point, he's like, "Remember that time we went to the lake and you got wet? Not in the lake." I'm not making that. That's an actual quote. It's an actual. You can go to the Warren G. Harding Presidential Library and you can read the letters. No, for real. They released him a few years ago because, like, whatever. Everybody knows Harding is a jackass. And so, by the time that Hoover became president, progressives started like a fever pitch. Like a huge percentage of the country supported these reforms. They passed repeatedly at the local level, and it just didn't seem to give a shit. I mean, like the Supreme Court was just like, fuck you guys. We can do whatever we want, right? It doesn't matter, right? And so then comes Franklin Roosevelt, right? And then comes Franklin Roosevelt, who becomes president in 1932 after a landslide election where he crushes Herbert Hoover like an empty beer can full of piss. And well, it's empty of beer and full of piss because Hoover's a jackass, right? And
Fascist transvestite. I hope he rots in hell.
are you thinking of J. Edgar Hoover, the allegedly transvestite actual fascist who ran the FBI? Because
Well, it was from senior
oh, okay, because
I was just going with
because Herbert Hoover is a mining engineer who was from Des Moines, Iowa, and then went to Stanford University in California. Right.
To be clear, they're quoting bad movies.
Yeah.
Hey!
Oof. Home Alone 2 was. Home Alone 2 was not. I mean, Home Alone didn't age super well.
So Herbert.
So yeah, Herbert Hoover gets crushed by Franklin Roosevelt, and one of Franklin Roosevelt's is the New Deal, right? I mean, the Great Depression happens in Herbert Hoover's term, and Roosevelt promises bold, persistent experimentation to fix the Great Depression. By the way, fun story about Franklin Roosevelt: he was the first presidential nominee to speak at the convention. You accepted the nomination the week after the convention somewhere else. They nominated you, and they would send someone to sort of, you knew, of course, you had people at the convention, but they would symbolically send someone to say, we've been offered the nomination, do you accept? And so Roosevelt sent them a telegram, and they're in Chicago in 1932, and he sends them a telegram and says, "I know that you just nominated me. Can you wait a day?" And they're all like, "I guess." And he flew in a plane. The first time a presidential candidate had flown in a plane. He flew from New York to Chicago in a thunderstorm, nearly crashed. And he delivered his acceptance speech in person at the convention. He brought the fucking house down. His speechwriter, I want to say it was Stuart Symington, wrote the line that I promise a new deal for the American worker. And it was a throwaway line. But when everybody heard it, everybody just blew up. The roof flew off. And that was it. It was the New Deal. He was going to do the New Deal. The New Deal was going to solve the Depression. But what it was also going to do was be the culmination of 30 years of progressive activism to finally get the government to regulate away the inequalities in the economy that the Supreme Court had stood in the way of for so long, right? And so during Roosevelt's first term in office, remember there's 32, 36, 40, 44, right? Dies in 45, right? Only presidents serve more than 2 terms, right? And in fact, the Constitution was amended to prevent that from ever happening again because of him. And so during, what's that? I mean, it was interesting because Washington only served 2 terms. So there was like this informal limit. Jefferson said no president, no man whose reputation is sufficient to carry him into the office can survive 8 years in the office with that reputation intact. And he was accurate. It turned out for the first 130 years of American history, if we liked you enough to vote you in, 8 years later, we hate your stupid face. I mean, there's nobody, Grant, no. Jackson, no. Washington, no. Jefferson, no. No. Even progressives didn't even like him enough, right? The shine only came on him in retrospect, because it turns out after the 26th campaign, everyone was like, "Shit, we would have voted for Obama again." But yeah, I don't think Obama could have even run for a 3rd term, right? I mean, maybe. Bush too.
I mean, candidates in 2008 didn't even want him campaigning for.
Yeah, he didn't even physically go to the convention. No, Clinton didn't campaign for Gore. Yeah, Bush too appeared by video to be like, "Hey everyone, welcome to the Republican convention. I have to go," and that was basically it. And it was like, wow, there's a political cartoon of him outside in line trying to get in, and they were like, "No, you're not allowed," and the guards were like turning him away. And so but everyone thought it was this sort of informal rule. It was not a law, but it was just kind of like it just is what it is, right? And nobody could ever get 3 terms. Grover Cleveland couldn't get 3 terms. Like Lincoln maybe, but they got just shot. And so along comes Franklin Roosevelt, and he will, right? And so in the first term, Roosevelt passed in the first 100 days a whole series of federal laws, right? He created the SEC. He did the Federal Banking Reform Act, the Emergency Banking Reform Act. He did the CWA, the PWA, the TVA, the dozens of major federal laws, and the Supreme Court struck him down all the time. All right, there was Black Monday, was I think in 1934, where the Supreme Court struck down 4 New Deal laws in the same day, in the same issuance of opinions. They issued 4 opinions in the space of, I don't know, like an hour, striking down 4 separate New Deal laws, and it infuriated Roosevelt. He called it 9 angry old men standing in the way of progress. So along comes Roosevelt's second term, and the question on the second term, 36, is do you like the New Deal, right? Do you like Roosevelt? Do you like the New Deal? Do you want more of it? And I have a book about it called Electing the New Deal, is what the book is called, because basically Roosevelt's on the ballot, but the New Deal is also on the ballot. Do you like the government interfering in the economy to make things better? And the answer, everybody says, is yes. Roosevelt wins. I think there's 46 states, 47 states. He wins every state but 2. He wins every state but Maine and some other bullshit state. And so I can't remember. And so you look it up. You can look up the 1936 election. What is it? It's Maine and I can't remember because I've had too much alcohol. I don't remember. It's no Alaska, no Hawaii. I don't think Arizona was a state. It might have been 48. Yeah. Yeah, it's Maine and Vermont, because the whole thing is Maine was a bellwether state, and so everybody liked to say, "As goes Maine, so goes the nation." Right? Well, of course, in 1936, as goes Maine, so goes Vermont, and that's it. Right? And so I don't even think.
He got 523 electoral votes.
Yeah. Yeah, Alf Landon was the Kansas governor who got like 8. Yeah, didn't even get didn't get his home state. The prairie populace of Kansas voted for fucking Roosevelt. They didn't vote for Alf Landon. Alf Landon was the stooge that they basically came. You got to run against Roosevelt. And he was like, okay, I have a real shot. And they're like, good luck, bro. You're gonna do great, right? And then you get fucking annihilated. And it's like, well, I mean, anyway. I mean, like, sure, good luck. And I mean, and to be fair, Wendell Willkie ran against Roosevelt in 40, and people believe he tanked the election. And of course, Roosevelt gave him a cabinet job in World War II. And everybody was like, fucking, you see? But of course, World War II was beginning to heat up, and Willkie argued, like, man, we don't really need a fucking change of office. And then in 48-4, it was Tom Dewey. And Alice Roosevelt Longworth, Theodore Roosevelt's daughter, she said, oh, Tom Dewey, I know him. He's got a little bit more personality than that plastic man you put on the wedding cake. Which is like, like Alice Roosevelt knew how to dunk on people. Right? She was my favorite. I love her. She's the best. She said, one time, you said, if you don't have anything nice to say about anybody, sit next to me. I want to hear it. So hell yeah. And so Theodore Roosevelt said, I can control the country or Alice, but not both at the same time. She married a congressman, and she was pregnant with another congressman's baby. Everybody knew it too. And so she did what she wanted. And so anyway, Roosevelt gets elected in 36, huge mandate, crushes Landon. And part of what Roosevelt thinks is that he can reshape the court. I mean, like, everybody loves this progressive New Deal agenda. I can do what I want, right? It's this huge personal victory, right? So he announces a bill to change the shape of the Supreme Court. And I know Hawk's listening. I have 500 points to Hawk if he can name the bill. If you can name the bill, I know what it is. I know what it's called. Are you?
They're Googling.
They're all going to Google it. He's going to Google it. Oh, without Googling it. Don't Google it, Hawk. Don't Google it. If Katie's there, make you not Google it. Did you look it up? Tennessee. Yeah, his dad, Albert Gore Sr., was a Tennessee senator. I don't think he signed the Southern Manifesto in 1956. So did you Google it? Did anybody comment?
The Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937.
Boom, the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill 1937. It's super fucking. I got a whole 700-page book about it, which is fucking good ass book too. I mean, man. Yeah, no, I put more books on it today. And so, having said,
There's a reason his office is over the
it's over the
concrete
garage, yeah. And so, having said that, the Judicial Procedures Reform Act 1937, it does a bunch of shit related to the structure of the federal court. But the big thing it does is it allows FDR the one-time opportunity to offer any Supreme Court justice on the court who is over the age of 70 the opportunity to either A, immediately retire, or B, if not, FDR will just appoint an additional justice to sit on the court as well. And there are 6 guys who fall under that category. So what it means is FDR would immediately get 6 Supreme Court justice seats, right? A combination of either up to 6 people leave, or up to 6 people say no, and then you just appoint extra people, and it would expand the court up to as many as 15 justices, right? It's a holy shit, right? And so FDR figures this is like totally fine. I want to do the fuck I want, right? The Supreme Court, it galvanizes the entire nation, right? For a few reasons. First, people actually really believe the Supreme Court. To use the memorable phrase you hear people talk about today, it just calls balls and strikes, right? They're umpires. If you look at a baseball game, the umpires, they don't wear team uniforms. They just wear the black and white stripes. Their job is not to represent either team. They just look at the strike zone and the plate, and when the ball comes in, they just say, look, that was a ball, and you missed it, or it was a strike, and you were never going to hit it, so it's a strike. And that's it. That's all they do. Right? And the reality in the Supreme Court in 2020 is we openly identify the judges. I've even heard people call some of the justices Republican justices, right? The ultimate acknowledgement that they're perhaps just partisan political figures, right? But in the 30s, people really believed that the justices are these kind of constitutional solons, to use this wonderful poetic language, that really sit outside of our political system and just say, like, that was constitutional, but that was not, and we don't really give a shit either way, right? I mean, we don't really, it's not up to. And so FDR's sort of tradition of traducing of this order is really upsetting people. And on top of that, the Republicans have been yearning for something to use to attack FDR for 4 years. And here he is trying to hand out money to poor people. And if you oppose it, you're kind of like a big fucking asshole, right? I don't want to help poor people because I guess they should be poor, or like what? And so for years, they've been searching for a way to, and now that they've given, they can wrap themselves in the Constitution and say, you know what, guys? I want to help people too, but I just love the Constitution. And I just think that FDR is playing fast and loose with Article 3 of the Constitution is wrong, even if he wants to help people. I don't think we can do it. And for Republicans, it's like a gift from God, because for now, you can say, hey, but yeah. Article 3 is the Supreme Court. Article 1 is the Congress. Article 2 is the President. Article 3 is the Supreme Court. Article 4 is some extra bullshit. Article 5 is amendments. Article 6 is how to ratify. I think there's only 6 articles to the Constitution, and so Article 7 is how to ratify. Article 6 is some other shit. Article 5 is how to amend it. Article 4 is some bonus constitutional powers, and 3 is the judiciary. 2 is the president, and 1 is the Congress. Yeah. And so, having said that, I mean, this is like it's a wonderful way to say, I don't oppose FDR because I don't like helping poor people. I oppose FDR because I love the Constitution. Don't you also love the Constitution? And all over the country, people go nuts. There are rallies. There's I found on the internet years ago, someone sent me a picture of a guy who baked a giant chocolate diorama opposing the court packing plan. There's all kinds of shit all over the fucking country, right? And FDR realizes that he's kind of stepped in it. His vice president, former Texas Senator John Nance Garner, Cactus Jack, goes to the Senate and sits in the he's the vice president. He presides over the Senate, right? And when they read out the court packing bill for some procedural thing, he stands up and he holds his nose and says thumbs down, which is like he's the vice president. And famously, FDR sends Garner over to the Democratic cloakroom in the Senate to take the temperature, and Garner comes back and is like, "You don't have the votes. There's no way this is going to pass. You're going to be fucking humiliated if this comes to the floor." And so, to make a long story short, what FDR does is he compromises, and the end result of the bill that comes out of the Senate is it bill still reforms the federal courts in some valuable ways. It changes the way the federal courts are geographically situated to allow for the circuits to be more fair, the circuits are the units of federal courts. They like each circuit hears cases from a few states, and the circuits have been constructed when not all the present states were in the union, so they're not geographically evenly distributed. And it changes that, which is good, and it changes the way the federal courts are sort of structured. All those things are actually really good, and it drops the Supreme Court thing, right? And that the thing to understand is that's how the government works, right? The president proposes legislation, it goes through Congress, compromises reached, we keep part, we get out part, we negotiate. I say, well, this isn't the bill I wrote, but it's got some of the stuff I like. I'll take it, I'll sign it. Except you got to understand, for any normal president, that would be totally how the government works. FDR didn't do that shit. Since the day he got inaugurated in 1933, what he did for 4 years was he delivered bills to Congress, and Congress fucking passed those bills, no questions asked. Sometimes they passed bills that hadn't even been written. They passed summaries of bills that were written later, right? So FDR agreeing to compromise for a normal president would have been fine. For him, was a huge defeat. It was a come down. It was a humiliating defeat. And by the way, the Supreme Court gave it to him, right? They dunked on him. In 1937, before the bill came to a vote and it was edited and withdrawn, the Supreme Court actually heard a New Deal case, and one of the Supreme Court justices, a pretty conservative justice, flipped and actually, instead of a 5-4 opinion against the New Deal case, it was a 5-4 opinion in favor of the New Deal regulation in the case. And one of the political commentators called it the switch in time that saved 9. Right? The Supreme Court proved to FDR that they weren't unilaterally opposed to the New Deal. They actually thought the New Deal was fine. They actually thought the New Deal was okay. Right? And it was a humiliating thing because the primary argument FDR made was the Supreme Court was frustrating the will of the American people by refusing to uphold New Deal regulations. Well, bitch, they just did. They just upheld one. It's fine. What do you even need this bullshit for? And so it robbed FDR's bill of its primary legislative justification, right? And so, but of course, in the end, we got to mention FDR ended up appointing a total of, I think, 6 justices to the Supreme Court. 6 justices to the Supreme Court over the course of his 4 presidential terms, 3 1/4. Right? Because 1933 to 1945, when he dies, he has congestive heart failure, and he dies in 1945 in the spring after the Yalta Conference in Russia with Stalin and Churchill. Right? He's really sick at the end. In 1944 campaign, they took him in New York to campaign, and the parade route, every few blocks, they pull him into a basement parking garage, and they kind of slap him in the face a little bit, and they give him some coffee, and they blow a hot fan in his face to pep him up, and then he's like wakes up a little bit, and then they campaign for a few blocks, and then they put him back in the garage and kind of pep him up a little bit because he's only able to function for about 3 to 4 hours a day by 1944 because he's got a congestive heart failure, COPD, and is aggravated by, of course, he was paralyzed, so the circulation is worse. It was the COPD and the congestive heart failure is worse because of the poor circulation in his legs. Yeah, and so it was. Oh, you can make a good argument that he should not have run for president in 1944 because he was not physically able to perform the job. But it was not in FDR's character to not run if he had the chance, right? And of course, he chose as his vice president Truman, a relatively unknown senator from Missouri, who ended up becoming the president in the spring of that year. And of course, presiding over the American defeat of the Japanese Empire, right in August of 1945, and then subsequently ran for re-election in 1948. And Dewey again, he kicked Dewey's ass. Yeah, again, and he kicked Dewey's ass. The Southerners bolted from the Democratic Party because Truman supported civil rights for Black people, and so Truman won the election without Southern votes, which was ominous. I mean, why did the Democratic Party support segregation? Southerners supported it. Northerners supported it because it's the only way to preserve the party unity and thus have a chance to beat Republicans. But on the other hand, Strom Thurmond and Fielding J. Wright ran as the states' rights Democrats, which they were called the Dixiecrats because they were racist assholes. Strom Thurmond always fucking hated it too. He's like, we weren't the Dixiecrats, we were the states' rights Democrats. We were for more than just segregation. And it was like, bitch, you gave your inaugural your campaign address on a stage full of Confederate flags. Fuck you, right? I mean, give me. Joseph, by the way, if you're interested in Strom Thurmond, Joseph Crispino wrote a really good biography of Strom Thurmond, which, like any good biography of Strom Thurmond, is highly critical of a guy who's a complete fucking racist asshole. Right? No, that was the guy that ran against John Ashcroft in, I think, Tennessee. And he actually died before the election, got elected anyway, and a court had to rule on it. Strom Thurmond was in the Senate until 2000, I think, and 3, and he had a birthday party, and he was a notorious flirt. And so he gave a speech where he said, "It's been a real honor to serve with all of you senators, but really I've enjoyed serving with your wives." And it was like, ooh, fuck you. And Trent Lott, the Senate Majority Leader from Mississippi, Republican Mississippi, gave a speech where he said, if we'd all voted for Strom Thurmond all those years ago, I think everyone had turned out fine. And it was like, oh, really? If we'd voted for a guy who supported segregation in 1940, is that what you meant? And Trent Lott was like, well, I didn't really mean that. And everyone was like, but it sounded like that's what you meant. And he, by the way, he lost his job because, yeah, it was. And they served, you go to Starbucks, you get a Trent latte in Starbucks in Washington, D.C., and it was 2 portions of a coffee and creamer in different cups, same size, separate but equal. Yeah, so Trent Lott was a real stupid ass, and it's a good reason why we don't need any politicians from Mississippi to get elected to anything ever again, for a while, right? Because, of course, you grew up in segregation, so it was like, you're an asshole, right?
All right. Moving on to another court case.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's court packing. And so, I mean, as long as Hawk is satisfied that we've covered court packing, it's his favorite thing. I want to get him. I want to get his.
I mean, he commented.
Okay. All right. So. Okay. All right. Well, then fine. We're done. All right. So.
Well, you have to do ground before this.
Yeah. This is. Brown v. Board, 1956. So let's talk about Brown v. Board.
He says he couldn't be happier if he's staying on.
And so let's talk about Brown v. Board. Brown v. Board is one of the most important cases in the Supreme Court's history, if only because of the effect it had, right? The consequences of the case, right? It was one of those cases where really people say, "Oh, none of that politics shit matters," or whatever. It's like, you're a dumbass. Fuck you. It really did matter in a really real way. So the NAACP, at the turn of the century, there's a civil rights organization called the Afro-American League. They changed their name to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. Right? They still exist today. It's arguably the nation's oldest civil rights organization. Yeah, I'm trying to give you love. You go over there, I'm going to jack you up. That's fine. You like Corey more than you like. That's fine. Who's going to give you treats later? It's not going to be Corey's. Not going to be over here giving you treats. It's going to be me, and I'm not going to want to. Yeah, go over to hang out with Tim. You love Tim. Whenever Tim is, yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, and you snuggle in the morning. All right, that's fine. That's fine. So the NAACP argues that they had a whole bunch of things going on. There was a great sociologist, W.B. Du Bois. No, it's W.B. Du Bois, I'm told. Somebody told me it's W.B. Du Bois. He was the first African-American to get a PhD at Harvard in sociology, and he wrote a bunch of good books, The Souls of Black Folk, Black Reconstruction. He edited the journal, the newspaper that did The Crisis, which covered lynchings, which the mainstream media didn't cover for a long time. And the NAACP had a legal strategy. It was the I forget what it was called. They had a legal department. It was like the legal affairs department or something like that. I can't remember it. But the whole thing was just get segregation ordinances in a court. Just get one of these ordinances in a court and then just read the Constitution to the justices and be like, Your Honor, the 14th Amendment says, whatever, right? And so it never worked, right? But in 1956, it might have. So a bunch of cases come in front of the court, in the federal courts at the same time, about school segregation, right? And they fold them all together. The Supreme Court agrees to hear them all, right? And they fold them all together because it's all about the same shit. And they fold them together under the name Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, right? It's usually called Brown v. Board or Brown. And it's the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. This is the Topeka, Kansas School Board is what we're talking about, right? And so the titular case is about a guy, I want to say his name is Otis or Oliver or something like that. But Mr. Brown has a daughter. He's black. She's black. He like lives real close to a school. But his daughter has to go to the black school. And it entails her walking a mile, riding a bus for an hour, and then riding a bus for an hour, walking a mile to come home every day. And he sues. He says, I'm a taxpayer in the city. I'm a resident of the city. I live in the county. I should be able to send my kid to the neighborhood school, right? And that's the case that they fold several other school desegregation cases. But the ultimate question in the case is, can city, state, municipal governments enact school segregation constitutionally, right? And so the case is argued it's the Legal Defense Fund. The LDF is the NAACP's legal organization, the Legal Defense Fund. And the case is argued by just a brilliant, just a whip-smart young lawyer, Thurgood Marshall, right? And so for decades, the NAACP, the LDF had argued that we just got to get a case into the court, right? I mean, if you just, and in fact, they had victory. I think in 48, the the Supreme Court struck down poll taxes and said you can't charge people for the right to vote, which was like that struck down. I think Alabama had a poll tax, and so here comes Brown v. Board, 1956. You got to understand, the civil rights was sort of like a fever pitch. There had been so the Truman desegregated the military. Gunnar Myrdal, the Swedish sociologist, had issued his groundbreaking report. I forget what he called it, but he did this huge sociological report about segregation in the South, which was a bestseller. And nobody buys 700-page sociological, data-driven theses and reports, but people did. And Northerners read about segregation for the first time in excruciating detail, right? And we're like, holy shit, is this what it's actually fucking like, right? And so there was this incredible sense of like pregnancy, right? It's like it's like when you go outside and it's about to rain and you can you're like swimming through the air, but it's just not raining yet. And in that context, Marshall argued the case in front of the court, and boy, was it a whopper! And nobody knew what the Supreme Court was going to do, right? And so, fast forward 1957, right? Eisenhower's gotten reelected as president. He's sworn in. The Supreme Court's term is ending, and they issue an opinion. Because the 48, 52, 56, 60. And so Eisenhower beat Adlai Stevenson in 1952, and he beat Adlai Stevenson in 1956. Adlai, because there's McCarthy that called him Adlai. It's not 1954, really? 1954? I thought it was 1956. All right, no, it was. All right, well, it was argued in 1954 and is decided in 1955. I thought.
I mean, I think that warrants a shot. No, I'm not. Sit on the couch. You just pass this out right there. You move the table. I mean, as long as it's not blocking the door, telling me to the representative.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Can I play that card one?
Fucking Michelangelo. What?
Okay, so 1954.
Whatever. Fuck you. I love you the best. And so everybody's sort of like, what is the case going to do? What is this Supreme Court? And you got to remember, 6 of the Supreme Court justices are appointed by FDR. Hugo Black, one of the 6, is a literal Klansman from Alabama. He admitted he was in the Klan. He later said that being in the Klan was like a social thing that you did to like network with people. No. He said he never did anything racist. It was just like a thing you had to do. But I belong to a certain secret society, which I do not think I have to name. And I must inform you that these boys interrupted a lynch mob in the performance of his duties. Right?
I love that.
Is you is or is you ain't my constituency. Is you is or is you ain't my constituency. That's one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. That's such a good. I am the goddamn paterfamilias. I am the paterfamilias.
Okay,
1954. Yeah. Is Oh Brother Where Art Thou, which is really is a retelling in the American South of Odysseus, of the Odyssey by Virgil. It's by Homer, because the Odyssey is the Aeneid, right? Is the Odyssey. It's fine. No, we always have time for Homer. Is the poet? The Iliad and the Odyssey is the no. I mean, it's fine. It's okay. Sun's going down. It's fine. So. Hugo Black actually said he was in the Klan, and everybody's like, well, I mean, that's a vote right there. And instead, the court issues, if I remember correctly, it is actually a per curiam opinion, which is an opinion not signed by all the justices individually, but rather issued in the name of the United Supreme Court, issued unanimously in the name of the entire Supreme Court, as opposed to being signed by individual justices by name. The idea about per curiam opinions is stronger, right? It's not 5 of us or 6 of us or 7 of us say this, but some don't. It's like the entire court says this, right? Am I right about that? She's checking my shit up. Yeah. Yeah.
Normally, in today's ones, it's the first thing that is like.
Just look it up on Wikipedia.
This is super.
Look it up on Wikipedia.
only 70 years old.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you think of like Westlawn, so you're getting an actual print version. Not it just says it's so ordered at the end, and I don't see anything at the beginning. But that doesn't mean it isn't pure.
It's. I know it's unanimous.
It is unanimous.
I don't remember if it's per. I really thought it was per curiam. I thought it was, but anyway, all right. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We'll find out later. Whatever. Hit up SCOTUS blog, lawfare.com. And so, damn, Fang. So, what did the court hold? Well, that's the really and I appreciate everybody. This is a journey. I thank you for being with me on this journey. The court actually held that school segregation was prima facie unconstitutional. It was just unconstitutional, and it said if you are a southern school district, named in this case, you should desegregate, and if you are a Supreme Court, if you are a school jurisdiction not named in this case, you should desegregate as well. What they said, all deliberate speed.
Fineslaw.com says it's.
So I was, I know.
It
Boom.
may not have been in the literal print back in the day.
Yeah. And so that's worth a drink of wine.
Let's get a fill up for you.
No, it's I'm fine. It's fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm way less drunk than the one time I had the whole bottle and a half of wine. Yeah, it's cool. I'm cool. It's cool. We're cool. And so this was huge. It was the first time in over 100 years that the Supreme Court had issued a ruling that said segregation is not constitutional, and they threw out school segregation utterly. And what Brown v. Board did was galvanize the civil rights movement. I mean, the limited activism that you'd seen got us Brown v. Board. And so everybody in the South, all the black people in the South thought, holy shit, we could, if we get together, we could do that. What else could we do, right? If the Supreme Court was going to rule school segregation unconstitutional, what about segregated buses, segregated streetcars, segregated hospitals, segregated, anything, right? I mean, if that was unconstitutional, what about everything else, right? And we should mention the Little Rock case, right, where the Eisenhower administration didn't do anything to enforce this, and the Southerners. Harry Byrd was a senator from West Virginia. He came up with an idea called a massive resistance. Basically, he said what the Southerners should do is not desegregate one fucking thing and make the civil rights movement, the nascent civil rights movement, and make the ACLU and make the NAACP fight for every single desegregation thing, to make them fight for all of it. And that was what happened, right? All the Southern senators, except for, I think, Johnson and one maybe Gore, signed a thing called the Southern Manifesto, basically agreeing to a massive resistance. And so the idea was the Supreme Court can tell us that we have to desegregate, but they fuck them, basically. Like, is what Jackson said allegedly when the Supreme Court under Marshall said you can't take Indian land again. He was like, let the Supreme Court enforce their ruling with their own army that they don't have, right? And that was basically what massive resistance was. It was like, let the Supreme Court come in and actually integrate our fucking schools, right? And so, on the one hand, nothing happened as a result of Brown because nothing got desegregated. On the other hand, it galvanized African American organization, political activism, and the civil rights movement in the South like nothing could have done. Because African Americans sat down and thought, okay, holy shit, the Supreme Court just threw out segregated schools. That means that the sky's the limit. I mean, if there's no logical basis to say that some things should be segregated, but other things should not be. And that was essentially the legal argument of the entire civil rights movement. I mean, that was the reason for all the rest of the marches, right? If this is wrong, then why not everything else? Yeah.
Al Gore,
It was Kefauver.
And Senator Darby
Kefauver, yeah. It was, yeah. Well, Johnson had to go and he had to finagle Richard Russell from Georgia, the presumed leader of the Southern Coalition, to be like, look, Russell had wanted a Southerner to run for president and win the presidency in his lifetime. He thought that was the way to heal the scars of the Civil War, was to have a Southerner in the White House. He's a fucking asshole. And Russell was a racist, but like not a Klan, like one of those Klan motherfuckers in the woods. And he was like a high class guy, right? that people like him didn't join the Klan. They were in the country clubs and shit. And he ran for president in, I think, 1952. He goes into New Hampshire, enters the primary, and gets his fucking ass kicked. And he's like, why did I get my ass kicked? And the senators that like him, they're like, look, like, Dick, like, I know you, like, you're a good guy, but when you take your Georgia ass up to New Hampshire, you're just a fucking racist. Like, you're just a fucking redneck. And he's like, well, I'm like, I read Greek. Like, I read the Odyssey in Greek. I read Tacitus in Latin. And they're like, yeah, but the voters in New Hampshire just assume that anybody from south of the Mason-Dixon line goes in the woods and wears a fucking ghost outfit, right? And so it really got Russell to thinking. And what he realized is a Southerner had to win the presidency to heal the country's wounds and to reconcile the South to the North. But it couldn't be a Southerner who was too Southern, right? It had to be somebody who was Southern but not Southern. And Lyndon Johnson is your man. He's a Southerner, but he's a Westerner. He's Southern but not Southern. He is, but he's not a lot. He was a Southerner who gave speeches about states' rights, but he didn't sign the Southern Manifesto, right? And so that paves the way for Johnson to get support of guys like Russell when he runs in 1960 for the presidency. Doesn't win. Loses to Kennedy at the convention, brokered convention, right? And of course, we should mention Lyndon Johnson, first big moment, gets into the House. What does he do? Runs in 38. Roosevelt was so pissed at the Democrats who didn't back his core packing plan that he campaigned for people who ran against establishment sitting incumbent Democrats in the primaries, and most of them won. And so it was humiliating. Roosevelt's out here saying you should not vote for this guy because he's campaigning his core packing. You should vote for her. And then she loses and he wins. A huge rebuke. But one of the new, young Democrats that wins is from Texas, and it's Lyndon Johnson. And Johnson got in a crowd. Remember, in Texas, there's no Republicans in the 30s. And Johnson got in by supporting the court packing plan 100%. He said, my fellow Democrats support Franklin Roosevelt, and we all love him because we're Democrats from Texas. But they don't support him 100%. They don't support the court packing plan. And it's bullshit. Johnson doesn't support it either, but he's not a congressman, so it doesn't matter what he says, right? He can say whatever. And so Johnson uses that to lever himself, to differentiate himself from the rest of the Democrats, and wins. And there's a famous picture of Johnson shaking Roosevelt's hand when Roosevelt came and campaigned in 38 in the midterms. And Johnson shook Roosevelt's hand and burst into tears because it was his idol. Roosevelt was his favorite. It's a good picture. So Google Johnson and Roosevelt and get on the internet and look at it. And so you can do it. Yeah, it's a good picture. It's a good picture. Right? Johnson had a killer FDR impression he used to do, and FDR used a cigarette holder. And when the Senate, when he was Majority Leader Johnson, would do it. And the trick is you sit down because FDR was in a wheelchair, but you tilt your head up, which is what FDR did when he talked to people because he's always lower. He was always sitting and people were standing. But then what Johnson did is the cigarette holder was a trick. It would flick the lighted cigarette at people because it had a spring load. So he would get you to laugh, and then he would be like, "Hey," and you'd look, and he would flick the lighted cigarette at you, and it was like that was the gag, right?
It sounds actually to be terrible.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, it was a Johnson joke, so it was like, remember, this is the guy who used to take shits with reporters in the bathroom. He used to take his dick out and be like, "You think Jumbo's big enough? What do you think, bro?" Right? He used to tell dick jokes, right? I mean, it was Johnson. He had peeing contests out the window. I mean, it's Johnson. It's Johnson, right? He took his dick out and put it on the table in the White House basement, and he said, I'm not going to let Ho Chi Minh beat us in Vietnam because my dick's bigger than his is. We're not going to let that little dick Asian guy beat me. And he allegedly waved his. This is Johnson, right? It's Johnson, right? And so it was Johnson. It was Jumbo, was what he called it. So what can you say about Brown v. Board? It was the case that really galvanized the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement is top down and bottom up at the same time. It was activism in the streets that pressured Congress to pass laws that galvanized people in the streets to do more. It was a combination of those two things, right? And Brown v. Board was seen by every black person in the South as being this clear sign, an omen in the sky, that the Supreme Court was prepared to strike down segregation ordinances if they but felt the pressure to do so. And so if you were the civil rights movement, what did you do? March, protest, make these things known, put pressure on the political power system in America to redress these grievances, because here was a clear sign that they were prepared to do so, right? I mean, here was a clear sign that if the Supreme Court actually considered the injustices of segregation, they would overturn them, right? And so it's hard to overestimate the importance of Brown v. Board. It didn't desegregate one goddamn school district. It was in some cases decades before some of those school districts were meaningfully desegregated. But in terms of creating, if you're a civil rights organizer and you're saying to black people, we can do this, they were like, I don't know. Our parents and grandparents marched for this shit, didn't get them anything, right? Why now? Well, the Supreme Court like unfurls the banner, and you could be like, that's why, right? And if you were a young black person, you thought now is the time, right? I mean, guys like James Bevel and Jim Farmer and John Lewis, they were like, now, like, this is a sign that this kind of thing is not a quixotic quest. This is a thing that we can do, right? And of course, things are happening. Montgomery bus boycott, Birmingham protests in the streets, and I think it's impossible to have been a black person in the South and lived through that time and not had the combination of activism in the streets and the literal Supreme Court and not thought like, okay, this really is different. This is not how it was in the past. This is really a moment where like things can change, right? And again, remember the Little Rock case where the Little Rock Nine signed up to go to school and argued to the school board, "Hey, Brown v. Board, we should all go." And it was Elizabeth Keckford, was the young African American lady that went to school, and they were throwing rocks at her and they were saying terrible shit to her. And it was one of the reporters. It's a great book by a guy named Klibanoff and another guy called The Race Beat, about the reporters who covered the early civil rights. And one of the guys was reporting on it, and he was watching Keckford get turned away from the little Central High School in Little Rock and ride the bus home. And these guys are like throwing rocks at her and throwing like ketchup bottles at her, all this nasty shit. And he really wanted, he said she was about to fucking lose it. She's like 16-year-old kid or some shit. And she's about to she's like trying to hold her to something. And he's like, you really wanted to go just put your arm around her and say like, look, it's going to be okay. But he said like, you're a reporter, so you kind of have to just sit there and write what's going on. Also, yeah, I mean, like maybe one of those guys is going to, they're not going to throw a rock at her, like generally, but like wing one at her face, right? And eventually what happened in Little Rock, Eisenhower had to send the National Guard. And he had to nationalize the National Guard, and he sent the 81st or the 82nd Airborne, right? And so these guys, the same unit that dropped at D-Day and fought all the way from D-Day up to fucking Bastogne in the Battle of the Bulge, and was going to drop into Japan if Operation Olympic had gone. Same military unit. These guys come in with bayoneted rifles and gas masks and stand in the classroom and they're like, you're going to fucking integrate the school. And of course, if the paratrooper with the bayonet is in my classroom, I'm going to integrate whatever the fuck he wants, right? But on the other hand, A, can you integrate every high school in America if you have to send the National Guard in? No. The Army in? No, you can't do. And also, B, the optics of sending the National Guard to every high school in America is a fucking disaster, right? So Eisenhower, I will generally say that Eisenhower was a very good president. The one negative is he is slow to support the civil rights movement, and he really only does it when the Southerners defy the Supreme Court and Brown v. Board. And he doesn't do it because he gives a shit about black people. He does it because he doesn't think the Southerners can defy the Supreme Court. That's his rationale. And he's not wrong, but also, what about fucking black people, right? But of course, remember, Eisenhower came up in the segregated army. So for him, he never he had such a limited worldview that was not an issue for him, right? It wasn't the same. It wasn't like Truman, who was able to transcend the prejudices of his ancestral homeland to argue that in 1948 the army should be desegregated. Because how can we be the representatives of the free world to the emerging Cold War scenario when we have segregation, right? How can we do that? Same problem Kennedy would confront in the 60s, right? So I mean so Brown v. Board is a big deal, right? So that's all my note cards. Now if we have, there's some Supreme Court. Okay, so are there any comments or questions? Jumbo, and yeah, we got and Jerry, and it was a penis episode. It was a presidential penis episode. Metaphorical penis, okay.
Or
Elena Kagan? Kagan, all right. She clerked for Marshall. She says the dean of Harvard Law. Like, damn, what did Elena Kagan do to you? She's not John Kasich's wife. You keep confusing her with John Kasich. All right, it's cool. Elena Kagan just crying in her house in Washington D.C.
I mean, Linda Kagan has heard about her show. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. If Elena Kagan, if you're watching, it would be fairly impressive for you to it would be fairly impressive. Thanks. Please comment, like or comment, subscribe. I'm not gonna lie. What does Clarence Thomas think about my show? Please tell me. Um, well, let's talk about the beginning. Ginsburg was she was a woman at a time where it was really not okay for women to like do things, and it's hard to imagine. But my mom, for example, she gets a job. She's in the Navy. She's gonna pay her student loans back. She goes to get a bank account, and she goes into a bank, and the banker is like, they're filling out the paperwork, and he's like, oh sure, whatever, blah blah blah. And then he's like, oh well, do you want to put your husband's name on the account too? And she's like, well, I'm not married. And he's like, oh well. The banker said to my mom, he said, I don't think an unmarried woman needs a bank account because that's just going to convince you to stay single. You need to get married. And my mom was like, fuck you, bitch. I need a bank account. And he was like, no, I don't think we're going to bank with an unmarried woman. It's not the kind of person we want to bank with. So she got a bank at a different bank. And that's a real thing that really fucking happened. Right. And so, I mean, that's where Ginsburg comes from. That's where Ruth Bader Ginsburg comes from. Right. So she goes to law school and she is, where did she start? Is Columbia, or she graduate from Columbia? And so she went to Harvard for a couple years, and she transferred to Columbia because her husband graduated, got a job. And so she transferred to Columbia and was first in her class, but couldn't get a job. And so she ends up at Rutgers Law School teaching law, teaching law. And she's a good professor, but I mean, she wanted to try cases. She wanted to be a trial advocate. And by the 70s, Ginsburg had ended up she became obsessed with the idea of sex discrimination, the idea that the law, as conceptualized in America, treats women differently than men. Well, yeah, I mean, that was her thing. It was literally her thing. It was the thing that she became. Sure. Why? I mean, I'm sure. Whatever. Okay, maybe it does. And so that was the thing that she sort of was bothered about, to the point where she really became an expert in that area. And she tried a bunch of cases. And famously, she picked cases where the law differentiated itself by penalizing men. There was one case where she tried it on behalf of a guy who was a single father raising his kids and was not able to claim a tax deduction that was what?
It was a bachelor whose mother.
Oh, is he caring for his mom? Okay. There was another one about a single father. It was later.
That was the first one. Never been married.
Yeah, so this guy's never been married. He's caring for his invalided mother, and he was trying to claim a tax deduction that would allow him to deduct from his income the cost of the care. But because that was like a thing for women, the tax deduction specified like women could claim this. And so Ginsburg took the case and was like, hey, if this guy he's not doing anything wrong, right? I mean, he's a single guy who's never been married, who's caring for his aged mother who's invalid. Like, why shouldn't he be able to claim this deduction? It logically makes sense, but also why should he be penalized because he's a man and not a woman? And it's an interesting way to flip it, because you would think she would have argued that like cases where women are disadvantaged, but she thought there's no women judges, there's very few women lawyers, right? Right, and there's a bunch of women, a bunch of juries are all men. So she said, instead of arguing cases where women are penalized, argue cases where men are penalized. And when the Supreme Court rules, as it eventually did in the 70s, that laws that penalize men on the basis of sex are wrong, not because men are somehow special, but because the Constitution is gender blind, then you win. Then you can take all those cases to court and be like, oh, hey, Supreme Court, it says here in the Supreme Court that like men and women have to be treated equally, so I guess this law penalizing women is bad, right? And so that's a big deal, right? And that was Ginsburg's sort of stock in trade, right? And she got those cases where men were penalized through the court system and got the precedents where men had to be treated equal to women, and then flipped them to argue, well, if you're going to treat men the same as women, why don't you have to treat women the same as men? And it turned out to be true, right? That was a big deal. It was a huge deal, right? And she was put on the court by Clinton, Bill Clinton, in I think 94, 3 or 4. And over the course of her career, right, she emerged actually in the latter part of her career as a staunch advocate for voting rights. There was a series of cases. There was one case I don't remember the name of, where the Supreme Court argued that partisan gerrymandering is essentially okay, and she dissented strongly and argued that by failing to give control of districting to nonpartisan boards, you're essentially allowing the majority to write rules that benefit itself. And there were two important cases: Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission 2010, and Shelby County, Alabama v. Holder, 2013. That Ginsburg dissented in. Citizens United, an outside group produced a documentary critical of Hillary Clinton that they wanted to air during the election, and they were not able to do that because of federal campaign finance laws limiting the expenditure of outside groups in the electoral process. And the Supreme Court argued a conservative opinion that limiting electoral spending on behalf of anyone violated their free speech. In other words, spending money to advance the agendas of particular candidates or support particular citizens is a constitutionally protected expression of free speech. And Ginsburg dissented and argued that if you allow this, it'll open the floodgates to essentially unlimited spending, and that's not, like, speech is speech, money's not speech. And also, rich people would then have more speech than poor people. Kennedy famously wrote an opinion where he concurred with the majority, but then said this only works if Congress passes federal laws requiring all campaign speech to be disclosed as to the source of its financing, which is nice, except, of course, you want to say to Justice Kennedy, he's dead, but still you want to say, look, motherfucker, Congress is going to pass that shit because they get money from the same assholes too. And of course, Congress didn't pass shit. And so today, as a result, what Ginsburg predicted is true. Speech in presidential elections is funded by super PACs, 501c3s, PACs, and all sorts of people, and none of it is subject to disclosure except the limited amounts of money that you can give to individual candidates. But again, if you want to give $1,000 to a candidate, fine. If you want to give $100,000, you give $1,000 to the candidate, $99,000 to a super PAC that you set up to run ads in favor of that candidate, which is separate from the candidate, not coordinating with the candidate, and yet advances the candidate's campaign nonetheless, which is, of course, exactly what she said would happen. And for my money, the real bad one is Shelby County, Alabama v. Holder. The 1965 Voting Rights Act had in it a provision to protect the voting rights of African Americans that said that any state or locality with a previously documented history of voting discrimination had to be subject to strict scrutiny in regards to its voting procedures. Right? So in other words, I'm not saying names, the South, some other places, the South, where some people, black people, look, we're not saying black people, but we are saying the South and black people. If you had denied black people the right to vote, you were now subject to what's called preclearance. And any change to your voting patterns, any change to your voting laws, any change to anything, registration, voting procedures, voting times, the location of individual precincts in this building versus that building, in this gym versus that church, or whatever, you had to clear it with the Justice Department's Voting Rights Division, right, Civil Rights Division, right? And that was what the Voting Rights Act said in 1965, and it worked. The Voting Rights Act fucking worked. Black registration soared, black political participation soared, minority representation soared. It succeeded. So in 2013, the Supreme Court heard a challenge arguing that the restrictions imposed on the southern states by the 1965 Voting Rights Act, Section 7, the preclearance section, were unconstitutional, right? And they sued the Attorney General Eric Holder, who was in charge of enforcing the Voting Rights Act, right? And the Supreme Court, in a majority conservative opinion, decided that that was accurate, right? And Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion. He said, because the amount of black political participation is what it is, because black people vote, we don't need this opinion. We don't need this section of the law. And of course, Ginsburg wrote a scathing dissent, where she wore her big ass collar, and she said, and I quote, abandoning the preclearance restriction because black voter participation is soared is like abandoning an umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet under the umbrella anymore, right? And it's accurate. As it turns out, the moment that section 5, I think, was struck down, preclearance was invalidated, southern states started passing voter ID laws. And some of them, North Carolina's voter ID law was struck down by a federal court, which argued that it was designed to surgically target African Americans with this precision to remove them from the voting rolls. And of course, under preclearance, that would not have happened, right? That would not have been legal, but that's gone. And so the Voting Rights Act is still on the books, but there's no enforcement mechanism. It's like a thing where we say this is a crime, but the police can't arrest you for it. So it's not really a crime, right? And so that was Ginsburg's legacy, was to really be a person who supported voting rights in an age where she was surprised, I'm sure, to find that they were under assault. And yet, much like Kennedy, started out as a moderate centrist and emerged as the constitutional champion of gay rights, having written, for example, the majority opinion in Lawrence v. Texas and Obergefell v. Hodges, two of the three most important gay rights cases. Ginsburg became this person celebrated for her dissents in voting rights cases, right? And I think if the modern political landscape is a morass, it's because of Citizens United. And if things like voter ID laws offend you, you can blame Shelby County, Alabama v. Holder, 2013. Yeah, and so Ginsburg dissented in both those cases, right? And so, she was a justice who I think suffered through a period at the end of her career where she was in the minority, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that she's necessarily be wrong, right? So, do we have more time to talk about Robert Bork?
We don't, but talk about it anyway.
All right, we're gonna talk about Robert Bork.
Before we go to the couch.
I mean, you don't. This is gonna be for real. This is gonna be for real.
You're not getting bored?
We get borked. We're all gonna get borked. It's not a sex thing. It's definitely not a sex thing because Bork would not. He didn't do sex. Missionary with the lights off, under the sheet, look of no eye contact with his wife. That was Robert Bork.
You're affecting someone's possibility of getting bored.
Oh, is it him?
There's only one person.
Okay. I mean, look. If you want to, if you had, I mean, like, don't let me. All right. It's Bork. This is the most consequential moment in Supreme Court history in our lifetimes.
Then why did it take 2.5 hours to get here?
If this is like a fine wine, it has to be aged. You can't just. This is history. You can't just go where you want. You have to get there. You have to. Yeah. You have to. It's like a castle. You have to build what? Oh, in like. Yeah, you gotta let. No, it's like that's how it is. This. Yeah. Fine. He probably didn't drink. Jesus didn't like it. So.
I thought Jesus drank water to wine.
I mean, if you're a Baptist, I mean, well, then why did the Baptists not drink?
Hop says you better start with salad.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to start with, but of course. All right. So the real action in Bork's career starts in 1987, but to tell you about Robert Bork, we have to take the clock back to one night in 1973. So Nixon is being investigated by the special prosecutor appointed by Congress to look into irregularities arising out of the 1972 presidential election and the Watergate burglary, which has since become public. Now, the Washington Post is writing newspaper stories about this. Things are being leaked to the public by two reporters, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, of much later fame, right? And the temperature is gradually rising. Congress appoints a special prosecutor to look into this, right? And in the Saturday Night Massacre in 1973, Nixon orders his attorney general to fire the special prosecutor. The attorney general resigns. He orders the assistant attorney general to fire the special prosecutor. The assistant attorney general resigns. He orders the deputy assistant attorney general, Robert Bork, to fire the special prosecutor. Bork complies. And that was what landed Nixon in even hotter water, right? And so this prompted a federal, like a congressional investigation. It was so clear that Nixon had committed a crime. He fired the people investigating the crime. Holy shit, right? And of course, people who are fucking guilty do it. And by the way, the reason that Congress passed the law that allowed for the creation of the office held by guys like Ken Starr and Robert Mueller, it was because Nixon was able to fire these guys, right? You had to have somebody who was sort of insulated from presidential interference, right? So fast forward, Bork is in like a circuit court judge or some shit, and he's ultra conservative, right? Bork argued that the Civil Rights Act was unconstitutional, although he upheld civil rights petitions in court a lot, actually. Bork argued for an expansive view of federal power, and I really think that if you could ask Robert Bork why he fired the special prosecutor, he would say that if I didn't do it, someone else was going to do it, so like whatever, right? But on the other hand, like it forever tainted him. I mean, you were the guy that did it. You could have resigned too, right? I mean, right? And so Ronald Reagan, 1987, Lewis Powell renounces his retirement from the Supreme Court. So Reagan is told by Democrats in Congress, if you nominate Bork, we're going to fucking burn this place down. You're on notice. And Reagan nominated Bork anyway. And Bork is really conservative, like in one of those guys who like the entire 20th century was shitty because, like, you know, gay people exist and like people like women wear pants, right? I mean, like he was one of those really, really kind of he was one of those like really like unbelievably conservative guys, right? And so Reagan nominates Bork. The next day, Ted Kennedy comes on the floor of the Senate, right? And Ted Kennedy gives a speech. I got to read part of the speech because this is some shit. I couldn't memorize the shit. He said, "Robert Bork's America is a land in which women would be forced into back alley abortions, blacks would sit at segregated lunch counters, rogue police could break down citizens' doors in midnight raids, school children could not be taught about evolution, writers and artists could be censored at the whim of the government, and the doors of the federal courts could be shut on the fingers of millions of citizens for whom the judiciary is and is often the only protector of individual rights that are the heart of our democracy. President Reagan is still our president, but he should not be able to reach out from the muck of Irangate, the Iran-Contra scandal, reach into the muck of Watergate and impose his reactionary vision of the Constitution on the Supreme Court and the next generation of Americans. No justice would be better than this injustice." And that's a fuck you. That's, I mean, when you hear that speech, that's Kennedy kicking Bork in the nuts as hard as he can and then spitting in his face, right? And then, by the way, Bork said later, there was not one line in that speech that was accurate. And one correspondent responded to him, "But it worked," right? Instantly, Bork became not a guy who just had some conservative opinions, but like an awful, evil motherfucker, right? And Reagan didn't have a clue what to do, right? There's a few things to say. First, Reagan was reeling from the Iran-Contra scandal, right? Turns out, by the way, fun story, negotiating with the Iranians to have them lean on Lebanese terrorists to free American hostages, and then giving the Iranians, as a result, weapons that you sell the Israelis, that the Israelis sell the Iranians, that then use the money for to fund the Contras in Nicaragua, which Congress specifically told you not to, after you promised never to negotiate with terrorists, is some fucking bullshit, and fuck you for doing it, you lying son of a bitch, right? But when all this blew up in 1986, it really put Reagan on the back foot. Right. Also, he's at the end of a 2-year term. Remember, 8 years is end of a second term. So 8 years is basically enough, right? And he's kind of unprepared, right? There's also a strong argument that Reagan was significantly beginning to be affected by the Alzheimer's that would eventually become a very serious illness for him. And so the Reagan White House was really not prepared for Bork. They thought they'll nominate him, and like every time you nominate somebody, there'll be hearings or whatever, and it'll be kind of embarrassing for Bork, but whatever. And so when Kennedy sat down there and basically took a shit in Bork's face, it was like everybody was like, and Reagan waited like weeks to respond. And you can understand it was really shitty for Bork. Like Reagan nominated you, and then Kennedy takes you to town, and then that's it. Like he's not gonna fucking say anything. Like what the fuck is this? Right? And so the press goes nuts. They report on this. There's interviews. There's digging into Bork's thing. One reporter, by the way, dug up Bork's, and I'm not making this up, his video rental history at the video store he frequented in his home, near his home, and they published it. And when people pointed out that like that was an invasion of privacy, the reporter was like, "Well, Bork is actually on record saying that you should not have any privacy rights except those specifically authorized by federal statute, and therefore." Because there's no federal law mandating video rental record privacy, then you should be okay to leak your video rental records, right? And fun story, by the way, Bork liked apparently British comedies, and it was like, everyone's like, "Oh, did you like porn?" No, he actually liked Oscar award-winning British movies, is what he liked. But of course, that was the thing: is Bork had this view where like the federal government had basically unlimited power to do what it wanted, and if you didn't like it, like fuck you, I guess, right? And so it blew up Bork's career. Right? I mean, like Bork did not get nominated he did not get confirmed to the Supreme Court. The Senate voted like 56 to 44 or whatever against his nomination, right? And he didn't get confirmed. Kennedy got confirmed in 1987. Justice Kennedy, that we mentioned a few times, he got confirmed in 1987, in 1988 actually, because Bork was in 1987. And so the verb to Bork is a verb that today means to destroy someone's public reputation by giving a speech mischaracterizing their political record in an inflammatory way, and it's what Kennedy did to Robert Bork. Yeah, it kind of was. Like I don't like Bork; he's a dipshit. But that was like taking every decision Bork's ever rendered and putting the worst spin on it possible, and that's what Kennedy did. It was masterful. It was masterful politics. Kennedy was good at it, right? when he wasn't, of course, driving drunk and getting into lakes and drowning women. Chappaquiddick, bitch. And so we're a long way from his fucking older brother dying over the English Channel in an attempt to blow up a German rocket base in 1944. That was Joe Kennedy Jr. And so, that and you got to understand, for a lot of conservatives that lived through borking, as they called it, that was it was like an unbelievable violation of the rules. And so when you see a guy like Mitch McConnell in 2016 refuse to have hearings for Merrick Garland, if you ask Mitch McConnell, why is it okay to just rewrite the rules, he would say, look, Robert Bork should have had a seat on the Supreme Court, right? Like that. That was the deal we were operating under. And then Kennedy came out here and trashed his reputation. And so, I guess we thought the rules didn't matter anymore, right? And of course, what you've seen is this retaliatory, asymmetric escalation on part of conservatives, particularly with regard to Supreme Court nominees, right? But if you want to look at it, Frontline did a great documentary about the Supreme Court a couple of months ago. It was like 2019, and a couple of months ago, and they started it with Bork. They went back and Bork died in 2012, but they aired interview footage of Bork, and they got people to talk about Bork because they argued that the modern day fight over the Supreme Court, where every nomination is absolute high stakes, and if this guy gets confirmed, it's going to end whatever we like forever, started in 1987 with Robert Bork. Right. And Bork, by the way, wrote a book. He resigned from the circuit court in 1988 because he was pissed that Reagan didn't defend him. He was pissed that Reagan basically wussied out. And he wrote a book called Slouching Toward Gomorrah, which is a reference to Joan Didion's book, Slouching Toward Jerusalem. And basically it was like, everything that's ever happened since 1955 in American culture is shit because liberals are awful and I hate them. And it was really this bitter, angry book. Kind of. Donald Trump would definitely nominate Bork for a Supreme Court seat if Bork were around today, because Bork would be exactly this kind of brown people are bad, talking mouthy women are bad, right? All that stuff, right? But I think Bork is, in my reading of history, Bork is a crucial episode because the lengths that liberals went to destroy, and they didn't oppose Bork on the merits. They probably could have. But Kennedy painted a straw man of Bork and then refuted that. He was like, look at this awful guy. And everybody's like, holy shit. And Bork was like, well, that's not really me. Right? And I think Bork is a guy that didn't resign when Nixon asked him to fire the guy investigating Watergate. That's the only reason you need to vote against that guy. That guy shouldn't be anywhere in the government. He shouldn't have been on the fucking circuit court. He should have been able to go in a government building for the rest of his fucking life. And yet Kennedy created a caricature and then refuted him. And it worked, right? And so, it's, I think part of why you see things the way that you do now is that we live in the Supreme Court, at least exists in the shadow of the borking, right? And it is great to be able to say the word borking, right? It was Sapphire who, in his columns about language, who used to use that word a lot. So, but I want to talk about Robert Bork because it's important. It's important. A lot.
Yeah,
Bork. Yeah, it's always the most conservative guys. The guy who's responsible for the intellectual articulation of the extreme evangelical position about essentially dominionism and like theocracy is a guy named Rousas Rushdoony. Rushdoony is his name, and it's like, say that shit with go meet that guy and say to his face, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Rushdoony." You don't have a name like a villain from an 80s cartoon. And yet Rushdoony is a fucking psycho. He thought that it should be okay to stone adulterers to death. He thought that the law, American law and biblical Old Testament law should be the same. And he's a fucking psycho. Right? But they always, it's the crazy guys that have the weirdest names. So, yeah. Well, and I forget what his Rousas S. Rushdoony. I don't know what the fuck S is. Probably something crazy. It's not Steven. Right? Do we have comments? Really? Nobody? No comments? Anybody?
Comments on time when Congress did their job and wow, that's not today.
Yeah.
We have to go 2 hours and 40 minutes.
For real? Damn. This is a long one. Yeah, Roe v. Wade is some shit, though.
Roe v. Wade's kind of his own lecture all by itself.
Did you have a question? You raised your hand. The question, I don't know if you guys can hear Tim, but Tim asked, how do you feel about expanding the court from 9 to whatever? Because people talk about the Biden should add 2 seats if he wins. It's okay. So Ted Cruz waxed poetic. Oh, I think at one point about how the court is 9 seats, and it's got to be 9 seats. And there's nothing anywhere that says the court has to be 9 seats. You want an odd number because you don't want ties. But after the Civil War, the Republicans added like 3 seats to it or some shit. And so there's not anything that says anywhere that you have to have that. And so I would hesitate to expand the court because it does open the door. If Biden puts on 2, and let's say in 2024, like, I don't know, some other Republican wins. Yeah. I mean, yeah, what's to stop the Republican in 2024 from adding 3 seats or 4, 5, whatever seats you need to get a majority, right? You can't count that many, put them on, and then like a 44-person Supreme Court is fucking crazy. And so I would hesitate to be the guy that opened that door, but okay, all right. I was going to expand my collection of pictures of her that are asleep, because I got a picture of her asleep on that couch over there. It was funny as hell. Yeah, we sent it to you.
Do you want us to take pictures of you asleep?
I mean, I've never seen him asleep, so I don't know. So yeah, anyway, that's 2 hours and 40 minutes on the Supreme Court. It was a wild ride. We laughed, we cried. It was this year's Cats. And so yeah, we didn't cover. No, we didn't talk about Sandra O'Connor, the first one in the Supreme Court. Elena Kagan. Right? Sonia Sotomayor, the wise Latina, right? Which they threw in her face 100 times. And then it was one of the Senate Judiciary Chairman committee members who said, "You got some splaining to do," and it was like, "You got some racist to be, motherfucker." And we didn't even talk about Roberts. We talked about Rehnquist, who fucking his favorite opera was The Pirates of Penzance, and he wore these ridiculous ass stripes. We didn't mention Scalia. I don't think I can mention Scalia. I fucking hate Scalia. So his fucking originalist ass bullshit. DCV Heller is the worst opinion. It's what the founding fathers said. Bitch, Madison specifically said the Second Amendment implied an organized militia, and you ignore it. And if you don't write an originalist opinion and you write whatever the fuck you want, you can write whatever the fuck you want. But Scalia always said, I go where the founding fathers take me. Motherfucker, the father of the Constitution took you to militia town, and you went the opposite direction to individual rightsville. You don't get to do that. You don't get to do that if you're just going where the founding fathers lead you. But Scalia listened to the founding fathers when he was right, and he wrapped that shit around him when he was wrong, and assumed you didn't know that. And he turned Supreme Court justices into historians, and he was a shitty historian. And the crowning achievement of the originalism that he wrote, his most important opinion, was D.C. v. Heller 2007, which held the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to bear arms, and therefore state, local, municipality restrictions on the type of firearms you may hold, like D.C.'s handgun ban, are unconstitutional. But he was wrong. The founding fathers did not conceive of the Second Amendment as guaranteeing an individual right to hold arms. They assumed that the militia system would prevail. That would be the basis of the federal army. And Scalia ignored it. Scalia ignored what the founding...
People ignore that one anyway, because the militias, as we see them today, at protests and rallies and things like that, are not government sanctioned.
No. Well, what Madison said when he said militias, we would be National Guard. Right, he would think that's the militias in the before the Civil War. They called them state militias, and they didn't call them National Guard like the 20th century, right? And so Scalia's whole argument in originalism was I just interpret the Constitution how the founding fathers wrote it, right? You got to start from the founding fathers. But anytime the founding fathers disagree with him, abortion was legal in like 6 of the original 13 states. But Scalia didn't bring that shit up because it's not what he wanted, right? And that's what makes me so fucking mad. Is Scalia advanced this whole theory of constitutional interpretation where he's just a vessel for the views of the founding fathers. And he just goes where they take him. Except anytime they wanted to take him anywhere that wasn't conservative, he would just ignore what the fuck they said. And so I hate that fucking guy. Yes. Yeah, I do. I really fucking do. Yeah. Yeah, I guess we'll call it here. If anyone's got questions, please let us know. If you've got a topic you'd like to hear, again, thanks for all viewers for sticking around. It's been a wild ride. Right, we did some Michelangelo shots over here. Right, there's nothing left in here. Oh, there's a little bit. Yeah, she filled this thing up, and I just kill me. It's like a 12-ounce glass of.
I figured it'll go back in the refrigerator. And
Will it be all right for a while?
It's alcohol.
Yeah, this is true. It's got like liqueur in it. All right, whatever.
It's only a third milk. Like the rest of it
All right.
is all alcohol.
It's getting a little fun on the nose. Ooh. And so, thanks to our Patreon subscribers. Thanks to Ori and Yuffie Winkler, who always contribute. If you have a suggestion for a topic, if you have a question about something, comment. We would love to hear from you. And so, join us probably next week when we do it again. I was thinking the Vietnam War because I got shit to say about Vietnam. We got to talk about the 50s and we got to talk about the early 60s. We got to talk about the VNQDD and Vonian Giap. Yeah. I mean, if some shit happens this week, we won't. But maybe we talk about Nguyen Tat Tran and Vonian Giap and Nguyen Ai Quoc, right? Vietnamese communists, all the one, right? And Le Duc Tho, right? Our main man, right? I think did we talk about Vietnam before?
Talked about
North Korea. All right. I remember trying to.
Not according to YouTube.
I remember trying to think of the name of Le Duan, who is the North Vietnamese communist leader after Ho Chi Minh, and I couldn't remember his fucking name, and it really pissed me off. And then I went upstairs to look it up in a book I had, and I remembered immediately. And so I feel like we've talked about that before. I'd have to go back and look at our videos. But anyways, I'm kind of thinking about Vietnam. But we got other topics we want to talk about. We got a box of topics people have mentioned, so we wrote them all down. It's around here somewhere. So if you're interested in a topic, if you have something to say, please comment. We'd love to hear from our viewers. Oh, LBJ had Le Duan in it. Yeah, because he negotiated with the Paris Peace Accords. All right, that's good. So otherwise, we'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much. Please join us again. And I think my executive producer is getting ready to say something.
Yeah, I'm gonna need you too.
Damn.
Because then nobody can hear it. It's just a feedback loop. So I'm going to run the end credits here, thanking our patrons. Go on Patreon if you can support us at all. If not, you can even just PayPal us a one-time donation or something like that. We got liquor bills to pay. But we also just appreciate your support. Also become a patron, and there's some benefits to it, including you can message Matt and he can, do a little thing, a little lecture for you. He's promising nudes. I'm not promising nudes. I think you have to go to OnlyFans for that, or I don't know. There's a billion different things out there. Yeah, OnlyFans is where we do the after show.
$5 send nudes, $25 to not send nudes.
$25 not to send.
That's right. That's a really good one.
All right, so I'm going to run the end credits. I guess we're going to do Vietnam next week, unless something more topical happens, and I really hope it doesn't, because I can't handle 2020 the way it's going. So we'll see you then. And let me find my brand banner to play us out.